Notre Dame fans, welcome back to another edition of the Irish Breakdown Podcast. My name is Brian Driscoll. I am joined, as always, on Monday by our Director of Recruiting, Ryan Roberts. And Ryan, it's recruiting hour time. And today we're going to kind of narrow our focus down on, because there were no visits for Notre Dame this weekend. So we're going to kind of start going through some different position groups and just kind of what's the latest in recruiting, just talk about the needs and the fits and the players. And then we're going to start also introducing some early names to know for 2024. And today we're going to start with wide receiver. And there's been a lot of conversation about the wide receiver position here in the last few weeks from a recruiting standpoint, from a team standpoint. Up until the injuries that started kind of piling up at running back, that was the position on offense, especially that I think most people were worried about from a number standpoint and all those type of things. I wrote an article this weekend where I talked about just sort of kind of, look, Notre Dame, as long as they don't go through a couple more injuries, there's a lot Notre Dame can do to have a very dynamic pass game this year with the guys they have on campus. However, the thing we've talked about is the lack of numbers. The talent is good. The numbers are bad. The problem is it creates a very small margin for error. And so, of course, how do you fix that? You can go to the transfer portal, move players. I don't love either one of those options, especially for Notre Dame. The way to fix it ultimately, Ryan, is for recruiting high school players. But because Notre Dame's receiving depth chart is in such a mess, it's not going to take one class. And so we felt it was important to really focus on 23 and 24 together. And here's why. Notre Dame has right now 7 scholarship receivers that were recruited as scholarship receivers. So I'm not including Matt Salerno. It's not any disrespect. It's just to create context. 7 scholarship receivers. That's a thin number. You want to be around 10, minimum 10, right? It's kind of where you want to be. And you want to have it balanced between, seniors to freshmen. You want to have it kind of spread out. Well, right now Notre Dame has 7. And they're going to lose 3 from the current roster in the offseason, which means right now Notre Dame projects to have 4 scholarship receivers coming back next year, which means if you add 5 receivers to the class, you're still not to your ideal numbers. And then, of course, if you add 5 receivers and then, you always run the risk of it's hard to keep 5 guys at one position like this together for 3-4 years. So you really are going to need them to string together a couple of really strong, successful classes that adds numbers and impact talent. Mm-hmm. And that is going to be the key. If they don't have success in both years, Ryan, 23 and 24, the problem is only going to be partially fixed. It really has to be a situation where they're able to have success in both classes. And and we have to look at evaluation of them with both classes in mind.
Agree completely. I think that the biggest thing is that we keep talking about Notre Dame getting to an elite level, right? Those elite football teams from a position to a position sequence not only have players at the top that are extremely talented, but if one of those players goes down or they need a break or whatever situation happens, they have another guy that's going to come in that's a 4 or 5-star recruit that's just backing that position up, right? And I think that we're seeing from a depth perspective, we know that Notre Dame's wide receiver group is in not a great shape right now. Like, let's call it what it is.
Numbers-wise, for sure.
Numbers-wise, yes. Not impact talent-wise, because we've talked in volume about guys like Lorenzo Styles and Deion Colsey and Tobias Merriweather and how good we think that unit could be on top of the Avery Davis of the world as far as like immediacy in 2022. The long-term issue, though, is what we're talking about more, right? Because, again, after this season, you only have 4 scholarship receivers that have been recruited to play wide receiver at Notre Dame. So you're in a tough situation from a numbers standpoint. And then what if you have to also get talent, because if you bring in, let's say, a 4 or 5-man class and let's say, God forbid, a Lorenzo Styles goes down, you need someone that can fill in and be an impact player. It's not just about quality of depth. It's not like you have 5 studs and if 1 or 2 goes down, and you're good to go still. You need guys that can come in and they can compete. We talked about it a lot here about Tobias Merriweather. Like, Tobias Merriweather for depth is very important, but also Tobias Merriweather needs to come on campus and he needs to be an impact player for Notre Dame. Like he needs to play, right? And I think that you really need that not only in 2023 but 2024 because numbers are going to keep dwindling. Because I mean, with the transfer portal the way it is, we're talking about guys just that are just going to be lost at graduation, like the Braden Lindsays and Joe Wilkins and Avery Davises. But you also can't truly predict what receiver or what player is going to be there on a year-to-year basis for the most part because guys are just so often moving now. It's just tough to predict.
And it goes beyond just like injuries. That's the thing. We focus a lot on injuries and we focus a lot on if the talent pans out. Well, the reality is the odds of every single kid panning out is small, and that's for everybody. I mean, you know, when you look at all the years that Alabama has turned out 4- and 5-star players, there's been a lot of highly ranked guys of all these number 1 ranked classes that didn't pan out. And it's not like, well, they didn't pan out because of the depth, because they would transfer somewhere else and still not be good.
Perfect example is for every Reuben Foster there is, who's a dynamic linebacker for Alabama, there's a Ben Davis, right? That not only isn't a player at Alabama, but then goes to Texas and is just a fringe, like just rotational player. Exactly. Right. So yeah, to your point, not all these 5 stars are slam dunks, they're ballers, right? Like some of them are overhyped. Some of them don't materialize. Some of them are maxed out and you can't predict what the growth potential is. Like it happens for every program across the nation.
And then there's the injury. Like LeBron Ray's another example. Bama was looking like, wow, this kid's going to end up being what we thought he was going to be. Then injuries sink in. He's just never that same player again.
Sure.
And that's college football. And that's not just Notre Dame, that's college football. And that's why depth is so important. And so for whatever the reason, the Notre Dame right now receiver has a very small margin for error, and it's only going to get smaller after the season because next year you're going to be even younger as a football team.
Yep.
So you're going to have, let's just say Notre Dame signs 4 receivers in this class. That means half of your roster are freshmen and over half your roster are freshmen and sophomores. That's going to be true at Notre Dame for 2 straight years because it's true right now. Over half of Notre Dame's 7 scholarship players are sophomores or freshmen. There's 3 sophomores and 1 freshman. That's 4 out of 7. That's over half. I'm not great at math, but I'm pretty sure that's over half.
It's 57%.
Next year, right.
57%.
Next year, if Notre Dame gets 4 freshmen and they have 8 scholarship players, 5 of them are going to be freshmen or sophomores. So it's going to be 2 years in a row where you're going to be dominated by freshmen and sophomores. Now, the good news is receiver is a position, Ryan, and I've argued this many, many times. I don't think experience matters as much at receiver as it does at quarterback, offensive line, defensive line to a degree, linebacker, because it's not a position that's necessarily requiring the grown man strength to be successful like you need at those positions. And it's a position where athleticism can kind of carry you to a degree. And so they can make it, but again, that's why you need to rebuild the numbers. They need a big minimum 4-man class in 2023, and then you need to follow that up with at least another 3-man class, maybe 4, depending on how the roster shakes out when you look at the 2024 class. And the reason I talk about that is, look, if Lorenzo Styles balls out the next couple of years and has like a Will Fuller breakout or Golden Tate breakout, the 24 class is going to have to replace him. You know, I mean, it's from a number standpoint. So that's why I say, minimum 3, potentially 4, depending on how everything shakes out in 2024 or 2023. So you have to look at them together.
Mm-hmm.
But of course, we're going to begin with 2023. And that's the situation we are. And of course, Notre Dame got off to a great start. And that was getting Braylon James back in April.
Yep.
It was a pretty good place to start because you got a guy that to me, you're going to need at least one guy from this group, maybe 2, that can play as a freshman. Having said that, if I'm Notre Dame, I think they have to focus more on the ceiling and not as much on the floor. And so a guy like a Jaden Greathouse we'll get to brings value. But to me, the class needs to be filled with more high ceiling guys and not so much focused on forcing high floor guys. And I don't think Notre Dame's doing that, by the way, which I like. So getting a guy like Braylon James, who I view as a 5-star upside kid. Now, I think he's a top 100 prospect. Mm-hmm. I'm okay not having him in the top 50 as a 5-star now. Definitely okay with that because right now he's still a very raw prospect that has a lot of learning to do and those type of things. But again, I care about the ceiling, and his ceiling is extremely high. That was such an important piece to get because number one, you're recruiting the state of Texas so much in 23 and 24. There's going to be a couple Texas kids we're going to talk about here moving forward, and Braylon James is a part of that. But number two, you really needed that impact outside big play guy, and Braylon James certainly brings that to the class.
I mean, we're only talking about 6'2" with 4.4 speed, right? I mean, 38-inch
almost,
whatever it was.
Exactly.
Like,
Exactly.
I mean, let's call it what it is.
13.9 in the 110-meter dash, right, as a junior.
Crazy. Yeah, 110. Yeah, 110 high hurdles. Like, he's a freak. He's a freak show. Like, what do you want to talk? Like, this is the kid that, if he's developed properly, is an NFL caliber receiver.
Right.
Like, that's what this kid is, and that's what Notre Dame needs. And you mentioned we've talked in nauseum about the layers of it, right? Big time player, unlimited upside, pretty much, and he comes from a state that Notre Dame needs to get into regularly. Like that. Those are the big key outside of just, hey, wide receiver needs more depth. Wide receiver needs impact players. You're also getting one of the dynamic players, top 100 kid out of the state of Texas, which is huge. Because when you look at it, Brian, I mean, everybody knows how good a state Texas is producing players. Like, you don't need me to go down a list, but you think about the everyone wants these Ohio State receivers, right? Oh, Ohio State, look what they're doing. Two of their best guys over the last couple of years, Garrett Wilson and Jackson Smith and Jigba, are from what state are they from again?
Right. Lone Star State.
They may be from the Lone Star State. They produce football players at a premium. Everybody knows that.
And this is a position they produce a lot of good players.
100%. Because even if you look at, if we're talking about 2023, there's a couple Texas kids that Notre Dame is hot on. One that you already said is committed, and Braylon James. 2024, another really dynamic receiver group. I mean, we're going to get into that. But
and it's guys Notre Dame's missed on. I mean, I'm sorry. Notre Dame, put it like, if Notre Dame's current staff was around 3-4 years ago, Marvin Mims is probably playing at Notre Dame. I'm just telling you right now. Kid originally committed to Stanford, if that tells you anything. And the point is, what I found is Texas, for whatever reason, I'm going to get into why. I don't live in Texas. I have thoughts why, but just it's irrelevant. But the reality is, you find more kids in Texas that fit the academic profile that Notre Dame is looking for. It's why Stanford has done so well over the years in the state of Texas. Paulson Adebo is another example. Marvin Mims originally committed to them. Stanford struggling helped open the door for Oklahoma, but that's where a lot of the players at Oklahoma has thrived with over the years. They've landed a lot of receivers from the state of Texas, and so this is a state. There's a kid named what's his name from Oklahoma? CeeDee Lamb. Ever heard of him, Ryan?
Nope, never.
You're a draft guy. Maybe you've heard of him. Where's he from? Texas. I mean, that's a position that has really thrived. And the reason that getting Braylon James is important is, number one, his individual talent. Number two, if he does come to Notre Dame and has success, that opens up a door. That shows kids from Texas, hey, you can come here and be successful academically, socially, and of course on the football field. Because somebody has to be that sort of trailblazer, right? And once that happens, like Manti with Hawaii kids. How many Hawaii kids that signed with Notre Dame in the last 10 years would kind of point to Manti's path here as one of the reasons that got them thinking about it? And so Texas needs to be that, and that's another reason why Braylon James was so important. We're going to stay in Texas for the next kid, and this isn't in any particular order of like best players. It's just kind of trying to follow a little bit of a theme here. But the other thing that having Braylon James helps is he's able to connect with guys in Texas, and one of the players he's really built a strong relationship with is Jaden Greathouse, who is from Westlake High School in Austin, won a state championship last year, put up monster numbers, and saved his best games for the biggest moments. Had 7 catches for over 200 yards and 3 touchdowns in the state championship game against a secondary that's going to have at least 3 Division I DBs. And so, so he's an important guy too, and having Braylon James in the class helps that, as obviously. But he's an important player, Ryan. He's had a chance to go to all his visits. Let's kind of quickly just talk about, where things stand with Jaden Greathouse, and then we'll kind of talk about why he's such an important player in this class. So we'll let you kind of kick off kind of where things stand right now with him.
Yeah, I mean, so Jaden has now been to campus multiple times this past spring into the summer, and he had not been to Notre Dame, even though he had tremendous interest. But kind of the whole quick synopsis is, Coach Stuckey really turned Jaden on to Notre Dame the minute that he took the job. And when he first went to campus I think it really stuck with him, obviously, like, wow, this is probably the place, man. Like, and I would argue from that first visit, they quickly became his leader. And then I think that you kind of hit a little bit of a lull, and then he came back to campus. And again, I thought that he left as the leader. And originally, Jaden was eyeing a commitment date during the summer, before the fall, before his season officially kicks off. That has been pushed back. And as far as we know, that is still
for now. Right.
For now. Right. At this moment, this is still the plan for Jaden Greathouse, is that recruitment is going to go into the fall. So I even know that he canceled an official visit recently. I'm assuming that is probably because he's pushing it back into the fall.
And he had a 7-on-7 event, so it wasn't necessarily a hurry to get that done, like you said. Yeah. I know, like you said, right now the plan is, but I do know that Notre Dame would still like for him to speed it up. And I think there are some things that could happen over the next couple weeks that might say, hey, you know what, this is what I want to do. I gotta, let's make that move. So
sure,
but we'll see how it plays out. But again, whether he carries in the fall, look, anytime a kid purposely extends his recruitment, that always makes you a little bit nervous. If we're being honest here. It's like, why? There's something there that's making him want to hold off. He said it to you, and what he said to you was, I want to see the offenses, right? Well, you and I think that's good because we think the Notre Dame offense is going to be pretty good this year. But it just shows that even as much as he likes Notre Dame, there's still clearly a little bit of something there that makes him want to hold off. And that's obviously something that is a little bit concerning. But there's really not a number 2 right now, to be honest. I mean, you can maybe say Texas, but I don't even think they're really a major player. I mean, it's just about, I just don't think there's a sense of urgency. Yep. I think the next 2 kids we talk about could change that.
Mm-hmm.
And the first guy I want to talk about, and this is more from a timing. This is the one player at receiver that we know when his recruitment is going to end.
Yep.
And that's Rico Flores. And we're going to do a little film breakdown of him here in a second, because he's the one receiver that we haven't really done that for yet. So we will get into that a little bit. But I think the thing for me, Ryan, is with Rico Flores set to make his announcement on July 3rd.
Mm-hmm.
Ronan Hanafin from Massachusetts, and we'll talk about each of these guys individually, but I want to first talk about them together. I would expect both of them to have their decisions made before the summer's over. Ronan doesn't have a commitment date in mind. I think he's still kind of winding things out. He just took his final visit this weekend to Boston College, so I think if you know anything about Ronan Hanafin and his family, they're very thoughtful, right? They don't rush into anything. Everything is talked about as a family, and I actually love that. I think that's smart, and there's different people involved. Yeah, and like, hey, have you thought about this? Have you thought about that? And I know there's some pro Notre Dame people around him that purposely ask questions to kind of pick at Notre Dame a little bit to make sure he's really thought through the reasons, which I think I love it. And it's not purposely picking like negative, but just making sure that whenever he makes a decision, whether it's Notre Dame, Clemson, Bama, BC, that he's 100% confident that he made it for the right reasons and all. And I'm always okay with that. I can live with that with all kids.
Yep.
But I don't think this is going to drag into the season. I haven't necessarily been told that. It's not like I'm giving you intel. It's just from what we know of his situation, I think they would like to have this decision done before the season starts. So I don't think this one is going to drag on too long. Clemson's made this one really tough on Notre Dame, but I like where Notre Dame is right now. We've said that for a long time. I think Notre Dame's going to be very hard to beat, and nobody's kind of given me the thought that they're gonna change it. So I like where Notre Dame is at there. And then, of course, Rico Flores is in a situation where he's going to make his decision July 3rd. And Ohio State's basically filled up, and the Georgia visit got canceled. It's really, it's almost like Notre Dame's sort of the last program standing, which I don't care. As long as you get the guy you want, I don't care what the reasons are to get you there. So he's going to make his decision July 3rd. We think Notre Dame's in a good place. We'll find that out, on Sunday. But if those 2 jump on board, and I'm going to circle back to Jaden Greathouse now before we dive specifically into those 2 players. If those 2 guys do jump on board over the next few weeks, let's say, I think that kind of might have to force Jaden Greathouse to change his thought process. It could. I'm not saying it will, but it could. And because right now, Notre Dame wants 4 receivers, and you're looking at it like they got 1. I'm good. I can take my time. If that changes over the next couple weeks, then all of a sudden Jaden's like, "Hey man, do you want to be a part of this thing or not? Like you're that piece we really want and need to go with this group. Do you want to be a part of it or not?" And I think that is that is when it could get really interesting to see what Jaden Great does he double down and say, "Nope, I'm sticking to my time frame, Ryan," or does he say, "You know what? This is where I want to be. Let's make that move." It's going to be interesting.
I mean, and like you said, I think the biggest key for Jaden Greathouse's recruitment right now is that, and I think Brandon asked in the chat, I mean, right now, Texas and South Carolina, right? Like those are probably the 2 biggest players, I guess, outside of Notre Dame. But like, I don't feel confident in Texas in that situation right now. I think it's more likely that he leaves Texas than stays in Texas at this point, if I'm being completely transparent and completely honest about that, just from everything I've talked to Jaden in the past about. But I would say that it's always, because Jaden's he's a really competitive person, right? So I don't think, and because to your point, it's not that you're coming up with numbers in the class. Like, let's say if they get the 3 wide receiver, that's like, oh man, like Jaden's going to look at that and be like, oh, can I compete with those guys? Can I find my spot on the field? He's just more like, oh, okay, like I need to make a decision now. Like,
that's exactly why.
Exactly.
It's not about competition. It's about, because if you're Notre Dame, you're like, look, we need 4. Do you want to be a part of this or not? Because if you have hesitations, we need to know that, because we need to figure out who our 4th and 5th is going to be. And if it's not going to be you, like, is it just you want to see something, or is it like, are there concerns, and how can we alleviate those concerns? And that's kind of my thing. So it's not them filling up, actually, I think helps Notre Dame, not hurts Notre Dame 100%. From a competition standpoint. And because I think Jaden's also a smart kid, that he understands most receivers that are smart don't want to go somewhere where they're the only guy. Why do you think Ohio State signed 3 studs in like a 4-day span, 3-day span? Because that's a good thing. You got enough balls to go around? Yeah, you will. Just look what they've done. The point being that most receivers understand, if I go somewhere and I'm the only dude, then they're going to focus the entire defense on stopping me. Right. And that's why you see a lot of times, and it didn't used to be this way. It used to be where receivers wanted to go places where you were just kind of the guy. I think this is where the modern offense has really helped, because there's plenty to go around for everybody. Right. In today's offense.
Volume is a lot different than it once was. 100%.
Right. And so, it's one of those things where now it's like, okay, I want to go into a class with other big time players. And I think the Bama class really began that, where they kind of, what little notion there was there that, do you really want to go somewhere with a lot of other really good receivers? The Bama notion kind of destroyed that, because of all the players they signed Jerry Jeudy, Henry Ruggs, and Devontae Smith in one class. They all became first-round picks. And then a year later, they signed Jalen Waddle, and he became a first-round pick.
Mm-hmm.
And I think they got John Mechie a year later, and he was picked, second, third round this year?
Second round, I think.
He would have probably gone round 1, if not, in my opinion, if not for he could have gone round 1 if not for the injury, in my view. So, but still, round 2 in this deep receiver class, I think was pretty good.
Yep.
So I think that's kind of killed that notion. So to your point, I think Jaden's a smart kid that understands, that's a class I'm going to get mine in, because I'm not going to, they're not going to be able to play me, plus all the tight ends and Notre Dame signs. There's going to be enough balls to go around, but I'm going to have a really good supporting class. So I think they could certainly help in that regard.
Yeah. I just think of it even just for the 2022 crew. Like, it's just Tobias Merriweather, but why would an outside wide receiver not want to come and play with Michael Mayer attacking the middle of the field?
Sure.
Like, you're going to get so many one-on-one opportunities. It's going to be crazy.
Right.
Like, good players want to play with other good players. And I think the key here is, we talked a lot about what makes wide receivers really successful, kind of that alpha mentality to them. Jaden Greathouse is never going to go into another wide receiver room and think that he's not the best receiver on the team. Like, he's just not going to think that way. But what he is going to think is strategically, like you said, oh, well, Brilliant James is also a dude, though. So there's going to be some guys rolling coverages over there at some points, right? Like, they're going to have to keep their eyes on me, which gives me one-on-one matchups. That's what that's why the space game is the way it is now. It's all a numbers game. They're trying to dictate the numbers, and they're trying to find the one-on-one matchup. That's all it is at the end of the day. So very well said, Brian. Very well said.
So let's talk a little bit about Rico Flores. This has been a very interesting recruitment, because early on, just we didn't know quite where he stood with Notre Dame and vice versa. He made trips down to Georgia. He made a trip out to Ohio State. He didn't make a trip to Notre Dame. The staff stayed on him, kept recruiting him. And I think part of the thing here, Ryan, is of what I've learned about Rico is Rico's a great fit for Notre Dame, but I don't think he thought that early on.
Mm-hmm.
And he is one of those kids. I mean, he liked Notre Dame. I mean, from the minute he got offered, I think he was attracted to it, but I think he liked Notre Dame for different reasons. And I don't think, for what, the academic and all that, but I think he was more attracted to the football aspect of it, which is why he looked at Ohio State and Georgia, which you can't blame a wide receiver for looking at Ohio State.
No.
But I think having not been to Notre Dame this spring, when he went to other school, he visited Ohio State and Georgia, I think that allowed them to kind of pull ahead. But the Notre Dame staff kept plugging away and plugging away and plugging away. And there came a point in time about the last couple months where Georgia, Ohio State, and to a degree Georgia, but more so Ohio State, put sort of a hold, and you started hearing stuff come out about maybe he's not a take, maybe he is, but they like these guys better. And this is why people need to be real careful with what they report and how loose they are with their lips when it comes to reporting what you get told. Because I think that kind of allowed Notre Dame to creep in, and because Notre Dame was able to say, hey, man, you're a take for us. You know what I mean? Like, there's no question about it for this. You're definitely a take for us. I think that allowed Notre Dame to really close that gap. And then once the visit happened, that was the first time, and you heard about how it went, how much his mom liked Notre Dame, how much he connected with people at Notre Dame, how much he realized what Notre Dame could do for him on and off the field, because he's a very good student. That is when was the first time, his June visit is the first time that I actually felt Notre Dame had a chance to actually beat Ohio State for him. Now, it ended up not mattering, because I think Ohio State's pretty much done there. They already have 4 receivers in the class since they got Noah Rogers, Brandon Ennis, and Cardinal Tate last week. But that was the first time I felt like Notre Dame actually had a chance to beat Ohio State for him, even if he was a take. So even if they didn't get Noah Rogers, and that's why it's important to kind of play that long game. And it's really interesting. You don't know. It doesn't matter if you're first early on. It only matters if you're first at the end. And
it's a race.
That's
it's
where,
a race,
yeah,
man.
Exactly.
Like,
exactly. And that's where it looks like it's trending right now for Notre Dame, in my opinion.
Yeah, no, it's something where, like you said, it's Notre Dame very, very positively can say, Rico, you've been our guy this whole time. You're not in a situation with Ohio State where, like, if we don't get the numbers we want, then we'll take you. You're not in a situation where Georgia, we're like, we like you, man, but we're not sure if we love you, right? Notre Dame loves you. Notre Dame has always been, Rico Flores has always been a take for Notre Dame. The staff absolutely loves him. And I think that's
more than we did early on.
100%.
I mean, to be honest. Yeah.
No, complete transparency. You're 100% correct. This has been like a long distance race, right? Like, this has been the mile if you're in the track and field. Like you said, you don't want to come out of the blocks too fast, right? Because then you're going to kind of die at the end. Notre Dame has withstood and lasted the entire time. So I think that, Notre Dame has put themselves in a great position. I don't really see it going any other way if we're being completely transparent and completely honest about it. And props to them, man. They did not back off, because it's easy if you're a team going against for a wide receiver that Ohio State is recruiting and the national championship Georgia Bulldogs are also in the top 3. It's pretty easy to get intimidated. Like, let's be honest about it. But the fact of the matter is Notre Dame wasn't afraid to play the long game for Rico Flores.
And it looks like it's gonna play out, work out well for them in the end. Ryan, I want to do a quick film review of Rico, because we didn't really get a chance to do that as much, because there was a time where it did look like Notre Dame was on the outside looking in. I remember he released a top 5, and we talked about it, but we didn't pay a lot of attention to it, because everything we'd heard that Notre Dame was like probably 4th or 5th of that group, right? And they kept plugging away, and then they cracked the top 3, and they're just plugging away. And then eventually you get to the point where it's like, hey guys, I think they actually have a shot to win this one. And now we'll find out here in the next couple days if that's going to happen. But that was a big one for Notre Dame. I'm going to pull up the De La Salle film first, and then I'm going to pull up. Actually, it looks like Huddle might be having some issues right now.
Uh-oh.
Yeah, so Huddle all of a sudden, I was in the middle of watching his film, and Huddle said an error has occurred. Huddle is having some technical issues, so we're going to have to come back to that. Rico Flores film evaluation. But we'll get to that point in time. But, the thing I look at Rico, and the one thing I like about him is he may not have, like, elite physical tools. He's like 6'1", 185. So he has good size, but not great size, similar to Lorenzo style size-wise. Good speed, but not great speed. Good athlete, not a great athlete.
Yeah.
There's nothing about him that from just a raw tool standpoint, you say, man, that guy's got elite, like Braylon James home run speed or,
Sure.
almost 40-inch vertical jump, right?
Right.
Length. Ronan Hanafin's raw speed. I mean, Jaden Greathouse's physicality and size and strength, the Michael Floyd type of game he has. With Rico, it's like, yeah, he's good. But the one thing that like when you say a kid grew on you, it's usually because he doesn't have something that just jumps out at you.
Sure.
There's not some elite physical tool that jumps out at you. The reason Rico grew on me is because the first thing that I look for when I'm watching film is I look for the traits. I look for the size, the strength, the speed, the athleticism. Then I evaluate the other stuff that isn't quite as important to me, which is how the kid plays the game. But when you watch Rico, he is an extreme. We talked a lot about this with Tobias Merriweather. He is a very fundamentally sound. Like, this kid just knows how to play. And I'll say this, Ryan, there's a lot of positions where knowing how to play only gets you so far. You have to, you can know how to play, but if you're a 5-flat middle linebacker, I don't care if you're the smartest linebacker on the planet, you're not going to be that good. You're not going to be good when you're playing against Bama and Ohio State and teams like that because you have to be able to run. Receiver is the one position, in my view, that more and more and more, as we're seeing, with guys like Cooper Kupp and Devontae Adams and guys like that, where they're good athletes with good size, but they're not elite athletes with elite size. They're not Mike Evans. They're not Jamar Chase. They're not Justin Jefferson. But they know how to play. And then there's a lot of guys that have Justin Jefferson's size and athleticism, but don't play like him because he also knows how to play.
Right.
But this is a position where knowing how to play can help you more than it can at other positions. And that's the thing about Rico that really stands out. This kid's understanding of how to run routes. Just like you watch him stem, how many high school receivers do you know understand the need to attack the leverage of a defensive back?
Not too many.
Not many at all. And understand how to manipulate with the stem. Look, a lot of receivers think the manipulation comes with the top end. If you don't execute the stem properly, the top end isn't going to be as effective when you're playing good players.
Sure.
Just little things like that. Proper angles coming out of breaks, how he attacks the football. There's a lot to like about him. And even though he's not a burner, the thing I do like about him from an athleticism standpoint, he does get his top speed pretty quickly. He gets on top of defensive backs really quickly. And you're watching this film. I was watching this film against De La Salle earlier. That's why I wanted to bring that up. He's not exactly doing this against, nobodies, right?
Exactly.
He's putting up his 1,000+ yards last year against really good football teams. So there's a lot to be said to that. And he is one of those kids that I say this kid will have a chance to play much earlier than you would think because of the fact that he's going to step on a football field, on a campus in college and know how to play the game of football at a high level from a technical standpoint. And that can't be dismissed.
Yeah, I don't think he's nearly as fast as a Chris Olave, but some parts of his game kind of remind me of it. Because one thing I really did like about Chris, and I similarly like about Rico Flores, is you mentioned the nuance of the game, understanding how to attack blind spots and releases and all that good stuff. My favorite thing though, Brian, is I think he tracks the football down the field really well. So while he might not be this dynamic long speed guy, he really knows how to adjust to the football down the field and play. It seems like almost like he has kind of a baseball background. He's an outfielder or something, right? Like he just tracks the football really well. So I think it's a kid that you need in this class, honestly, because we talked about the importance of Jaden Greathouse because he is a kid that can come and play right now, right? Braylon James, there was some things that need to happen, right? Like maturation that needs to happen, some roundness of his game that needs to happen. Ronan Hanafin, I feel like, is in the same ballpark. Incredible tools, but needs a little bit of maturation as far as his game.
Same with Braylon James, correct?
100%. Yeah, but for a But for a Rico Flores, again, the ceiling might not be as nearly as high as those guys, but he can come in and play. Like, there's no doubt. Like, he can give you reps. He's going to come onto the football field, and he's not going to hurt you. He's going to give you valuable depth. And I think those players get very undervalued, which is why I think he is very undervalued. But Rico Flores is a good football player. Whether he's the fourth receiver in this class or the fifth, doesn't really matter. All I know is or the third, he is a quality football player, and any team is going to be lucky to have him.
Yeah. I think the fact that he is a strong student also helps, because I think when you have a kid, the tougher that the academic transition is for a student athlete, the harder it is to play as a freshman. Mm-hmm. Doesn't mean it can't happen, but it just factors into it, because as we've said before, freshmen at Notre Dame have to take calculus. They have to do things that, let's be honest, just aren't happening in other schools. It's not an insult. It's just reality. Sure. And I realize a lot of people get real sensitive when you say that, this is the case, and, like, it's just the reality of it. Okay. It's different. So that's kind of where I'm at with him, Ryan, is I think all those things factor into why this is a valuable pickup, is because you need depth. And here's something else that's grown on me. When I first watched Rico, I kind of viewed him as more of an X, pure X, the route running and the size and all that. Sure. But the more and more I watch this film, the more and more I said he could do a lot of the things that Tommy Rees has talked about the slot doing, which is more of a pro style slot as opposed to the bubble screens and that kind of stuff. But more of a guy that can work the seams, work the middle of the field, be a really strong route runner, has enough size to get off of press releases and things like that. To me, I think Rico can play both field positions. And I think he's got enough size, like Lorenzo Styles, to do some boundary stuff, even though that's not where I would put him full time. But there's some looks I could use him. So he brings a little bit more versatility to the table than I originally projected for him. And I think that's an important thing too, to the point where of all the receivers that Notre Dame could potentially get in this class, the only guy right now that's on the board that I think projects more as a slot is actually Micah Tease of the group guys we're talking about, because of that feel for the game aspect of it. That's a really important thing for a slot in a pro-style offense, is a guy that knows how to work open. Much more important than being able to catch a bubble screen and turn it into a 20-yard gain. But that's nice, but you've got to be able to do the first part before you can do the second part, in my opinion.
Yep. No, it's been an interesting journey for the slot receiver position in this class, man. It has been a very interesting one. But I think Micah Tease does have that natural instinct that you're talking about, Brian, right? Like, you need some ability to work in space, and people think that it's just simply, a team manipulates space and then a wide receiver runs to space, right? But like, that's not all it is, because there are linebackers scraping over, there's cornerbacks working inside out, there's safeties running the alley. You have to kind of have almost a sixth sense to where players are on the field and the ability to navigate that space, right? So I think Micah Tease definitely has that. I think there's players in a pinch, like you could tell me that Jaden Greathouse could play in the slot a little bit. Absolutely. It's going to be a different type of slot, but he can do it. Rico Flores, I think, could do it a little bit. But Micah Tease is that true slot type, because you give him a crease and he has an understanding of what's happening around him. He can create a 15-yard play into a 40-yard play. Right. Like, that's what type of player this kid is, in my opinion.
Let's talk about Ronan Hanafin last, because he's the guy right now. We've talked about Jaden Greathouse and the tie in Texas, and then we've obviously Rico Flores has something coming up. We're going to talk about Ronan Hanafin last, of kind of the four players that we feel best about, and then we'll kind of wrap it up with Micah Tease, because that's a little bit of an interesting situation. So Ronan Hanafin obviously is a guy from a recruiting standpoint. We've talked about this. Clemson and Alabama have really made a hard push for him, to the point where the head coaches have been heavily involved in his recruitment. I still like where Notre Dame is at. It's now about closing, right? He went to Bama. I think coming out of the Notre Dame visit, there was a lot of good vibes about where things stood with Notre Dame and Ronan. But he was insistent on making the final two visits. And anytime a kid visits Alabama, I don't care where he stands with Notre Dame or anywhere else, Bama's a different animal. Even though he'd been to Bama before, Bama's a different animal. And, of course, Clemson's still there too. They've done a great job recruiting Ronan Hanafin. And then, of course, this weekend he went to BC, which is the home school. And so, of course, anytime, that's something to think about too. But I still like where Notre Dame is at. My opinion there hasn't changed. They have to close. So as you look at Ronan as a player, I think this is the kid, in my view, that is the biggest misevaluation on the board And even the people that are ranking him as a 4-star now, I still don't think they get it.
Right.
I think what it boils down to is I think that when people look at Ronan Hanafin, I don't think a lot of people understand just how athletic this kid is. And I think there's this like I heard somebody, I was talking to somebody one time, like, he's a really smart football player. He knows how to play the game. And I'm like, yeah, for defense, sure.
Mm-hmm.
But for offense, he's a really raw player. I mean, not that he's not smart, but he's it's like, oh, he's a really good savvy route runner. I'm like, are we talking about the same kid? Like, no, he's not. Like, could he become one? Sure.
He's a white receiver. He has to be a savvy route runner.
Has to be. I get it. I wasn't going to say it. You said it. All good.
I'll keep saying it, man. I'm good with it.
But I think that's part of the thing that factors into it, right?
Yeah.
And it's kind of like with like Dante Moore quarterback. I remember having a conversation with somebody one time on Facebook where they were like, Notre Dame needs a drop back quarterback. And I'm like, okay. And it was in response to a Dante. And he's like, well, this kid doesn't really fit that mold. And I was like, based on what? Like, I don't know if you've watched this kid's film, but Dante Moore doesn't run at all. I mean, hardly at all. But that's the reality of it. There's stereotypes that people get based on things that shouldn't matter. What matters to me is the film. And I think that's what people have missed about Ronan Hanafin. Like, I'm just waiting for the sneaky athleticism conversation to pop up. The reality is this kid's 6'3", 205 pounds. He runs a 4.4, and he's freaky athletic for his size. Mm-hmm. And I think not only is he underrated, even with the new 4-star ranking, and he's, but still not in the top 250. If this kid's not pushing the top 100 in your rankings list, I still say you don't have a clue what this kid's capable of. And even just as a pure receiver, I feel that way. When you add the fact that this is one of the few kids in the nation that could be a legitimate starter at multiple positions on both sides of the ball. Look, who have been the two dominant programs of college football last decade? It's Clemson and Alabama. They're both recruiting him for opposite sides of the football.
Which is crazy.
Clemson wants him at receiver. They've done a pretty good job developing receivers. Bama wants him at, sort of that hybrid, edge player. That should tell you everything you need to know about what kind of prospect this is, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, think about that. And the head coaches are heavily involved in his recruitment. And I think that's the thing for me is like, I just kind of laugh when I read some of the evaluations. Like, ooh, we have newly minted 4-star. I'm like, that doesn't mean anything. If you don't see these a 4-star, you need to find something else to do with your job. Are you willing to kind of make the right reevaluation? Say, you know what? This kid's a special kid. This is a kid that needs to be in the conversation as a top 100 caliber prospect. Irish Breakdown gave him that grade, a.k.a. me. I don't want to project that onto Ryan. He hasn't necessarily said where he ranks Ronan Hanafin. I think we're kind of close to the same standard, Ryan, but we're not off by much if we're off at all. But I think that's the thing. And I think that's partly why there hasn't been as much excitement about possibly landing him from some Notre Dame parts of the fan base, even the Irish Breakdown fan base. I think people want Ronan Hanafin in this chat, but even in this chat, which I believe is the most informed group of Notre Dame fans in the business, which is why they listen to this channel, because smart people like being informed, and so they come to this chat. And that's why so many people in this chat will push back on us because there is conviction in their knowledge of the game, even when they're wrong. Sorry. I had to say it. But
they're not listening. They're talking about Jackson State.
I know, right? Yeah, start banning people. But the point is, Ryan, is I still don't think even then that those Notre Dame fans really appreciate just the just how athletic and unique this kid is. We've seen pictures of him next to Braylon James. He makes Braylon look small. He does. Like, they're not too far off height-wise, but they're different bodies. And then when you throw in the fact that this is a kid with a documented 4.4 in the 40, this is a unique kid, and a kid that I just don't think is getting enough attention for being a unique athlete. I think there's the savvy, the high football IQ bullcrap that we hear. No, I don't want this kid because of that. I don't care about that right now. I want this kid because he's a 6'3", 205-pound athlete that can freaking run. That's what I like about Ronan Hanafin.
If you want any clue of how gifted of an athlete he is, again, to reiterate to what Brian just said, Alabama wants him in the Will Anderson position.
Yes.
Like, what do you have to say about it, man?
Absurd.
Like, even if you want to say, oh, they want him to be Dallas Turner. Okay. Right. Like, freak shows, man. They're all a bunch of freak shows. This kid is so physically gifted. that Alabama wants him to be a pass rusher, hybrid edge player, whatever you want to call him. And then other premier programs like Oklahoma, Clemson, USC, they want him to play wide receiver.
Mm-hmm.
It's,
right.
Again, we're talking about 6'3", 4.4 speed, huge catch radius, and he's physically ready to play right now, right? Like from just a body perspective.
Right.
And I agree completely with you, Brian. He's not he has some work to do on the offensive side of the football because it's not that's not his first position, right? Like he was a defensive player and he still is a defensive player and he's a good one. I still think that he could be a really good rover on Notre Dame's defense. I think he could be a fantastic player in that situation. But 6'3",
he's more natural
skills,
there right
100%.
now. Like mentally, he is more of a defensive player, Ryan. He is more comfortable on defense right now. I just don't think it's his highest upside.
Yeah.
Back to what you were saying.
No.
Receiver.
It's really well said. I would say, though, when we're talking about, again, that profile that you have, 6'3", 205, still can put on some weight, even though he's already physically ready to play, 4.4 speed. Like, those guys are just they don't just walk around that often, right? Like, you can't find 6'3" guys, 4.4 speed, especially out of the state of Massachusetts. Like, he sticks out like a sore thumb, man. He's running past everybody on his high school level. It's just so, kid is a freak of nature from an athletic perspective. Upside is immense. He's definitely a work in progress on the offensive side of the football, but if he hits a ceiling, he's going to be a really, really good football player on the next level.
I'm just appalled by what I just read in our chat. Just appalled. Charles Drury just said that Tupac is one of the bottom 5 rappers of all time. I'm just trying to decide whether or not I'm going to ban him, whether I'm going to call the authorities. I don't even know what to say at this point in time. And he's doubling down. I'm just incredibly offended right now. In all seriousness, I think at this point in time, Ryan, you look at those 4 guys, the reality is the board's kind of small at this point in time. They cannot afford to miss on any of those guys. That's the reality of it. They cannot afford to miss. They have to hit, because if they miss on those guys, then right now it's about, finding guys that really aren't that high on you, or flipping a kid who maybe just isn't to the level that these other guys are. I mean, there's a couple guys on the board that we could talk about. I don't want to name names specifically, but Notre Dame could have them in the class tomorrow if they wanted them. There's a reason they're not in the class, because they're not as good in those areas. So I think that to me is really the area where you get a little bit concerned, right? Like, I love the board where it's at right now, but they got to close. The good news is I think Notre Dame's the leader for all 3 of those kids. That is the good news at this point in time. And significant leader, I would argue, for at least 2 of them. Let's go to final kid, because this is the one that I'm at this point in time kind of most curious about, and that is Micah Tease. So, Ryan, depending on who you talk to, I talk to some people, and USC's the team to beat, and then you talk to other people, and you're like, I think Notre Dame's a dark horse here. I think Notre Dame's got a really good chance there. And I learned something new recently talking with Sean Davis, is because he's gotten to know Christian Gray really well. Apparently, Micah Tease and Christian Gray have been really good friends since they were freshmen in high school. And so that should help as well. But this is a kid to me that is a very unique player, because he is a lot like Ronan Hanafin, in that there's a small number of players that, in my view, could be really good on both sides of the ball. And Micah Tease and Ronan Hanafin are 2 of those. Those are 2 kids that are legitimate starting caliber players on both sides of the ball. He wants a chance to play offense. Notre Dame wants to give him that. He is the unique kid, but basically it's going to come down to, can you convince him that you're serious about giving him a chance at wide receiver?
Right. And that's kind of been the whole back and forth all along. It's right. Like, Oklahoma is the assumed team to beat for a long time. They just want him at safety. They don't want to mess around with offense. And obviously Micah Tease wants an opportunity to play wide receiver, and that's fine. That's what he wants. Notre Dame has been lucky enough to, for a while now, have the standpoint that we're recruiting you as an athlete. We'll give you a chance to play wide receiver. We think you could also be a dynamic player on the defensive side of the football. And then USC obviously is the main competition right now, it seems, because they have also been consistent as just strictly offense. I don't even think they have even sold him on defense at all from USC's perspective. It's always been wide receiver for the USC staff. So those are really two big ones here. Brian, like I'm here with him, and I continue to be cautiously optimistic, but then I'm also like USC presents problems. I think that is going to be a tough player to beat in this instance. But I do think that, again, I've said it pretty consistently. I do think Micah Tease, Notre Dame is in the top 2 for Micah Tease.
Yeah.
What the order is, we can debate all day. That's cool. But at the end, Micah Tease has been to campus, 5 times now? Like, he's been here often. So obviously there's intrigue. And like you just mentioned, the Christian Gray layer of the conversation is very interesting. That could be huge. We talk about all the time how important recruitment from committed players can be for the classes, right? We talked about the fact that Jaden Greathouse has a good relationship with Braylon James earlier in the show. Same thing in this instance. It can help them tremendously, I think. Just the fact that there is some relationship there. I know Notre Dame wants Micah Tease in the class. I think, man, he could be a really good player, I think, in multiple spots. I, like you, think that he would be a better corner than wide receiver long-term. But if he's a slot receiver for Notre Dame, he'd be an easy take for me, and he's an easy take for the staff right now.
Yeah, there's no question about him being a take. I mean, I think the only debate that Notre Dame had was, where do we want him? And there was a battle between the defensive staff really wanted him and the offensive staff really wanted him, and that was where the battle was. And so I think ultimately came down to, where does Micah want to play?
Right.
And Micah's pretty adamant he wants a shot on offense. And so the key now for Notre Dame is honestly being able to say to the kid, we like you there or not. And that's the selling point. I really believe that if Notre Dame can really convince him that this is where we want you, you're going to get a legitimate chance to play wide receiver. And here's the deal. If they get commitments from 4 other receivers before he decides to jump on board, they still have a pretty good selling spot because, hey, Micah, what's different about you than all those other guys? You bring a skill set that they don't have. And that is what makes Micah important, is he's the one kid, because I do think you need this on your roster. I've said this for 2 years now. You need a kid on your roster in college football. I don't care how pro-style your offense is. You got to have a kid that you can just get the ball to easily and say, go do something. You have to have that. And there's other guys on the board that can do that to varying degrees. I mean, Braylon James has the kind of speed and enough elusiveness where he can catch a crossing route, make a guy miss, and outrun the defense, right? Like Jaden Greathouse can use his size. Ronan can use his, but they're not make-you-miss players.
Sure.
Micah can be a make-you-miss player, as well as he brings some of the pro style. He can run routes. He's a vertical player. He can work the seams. He's got good ball skills. Even though he's not a bigger guy, he's got really good ball skills. Plays against really quality competition. And so when you look at it, you look at it and say, hey, can you fit in with this group? That's how you eliminate the numbers being a problem. Right. And so to me, that's the selling point that Notre Dame has. And that's what I think ultimately could win this battle, but there's a lot of work that needs to be done. There's no question about it.
Agree completely.
So you look at these 5, Ryan.
Yep.
If they can get those 5, one of the questions that we were asked in the chat, I'm going to try to find it here real quick. Here it is from Tony Stengel. I want to add, we'll have a Q&A afterwards. So throw all your questions out there afterwards. But the question is James, Flores, Greathouse, Hanafin. So not even getting Micah Tease. So I'll ask that second. I'll ask the first question first. Now, my premise for what a gap closing class is, right? There's 2 ways to have a gap closing class. One is you've just vaulted yourself onto that standard. And that's obviously, that could be argued that's not even gap closing, that's gap erasing, but gap closing. The second is it's a really strong class that improves where you are and gets you closer to that. That's closing the gap. It's not gap close, but closing the gap. So it can be one of those 2 type of things. Where would you see that foursome for Notre Dame in regards to, is this a gap closing class, and to what degree is it such?
It is a gap closing class. I would say the latter in that comparison. Like, I think it's definitely trending in the right direction. It's getting close to closing the gap. I would say the only thing for me, though, Brian, is that We talked about James and Hanafin. Tremendous upside. And if you can guarantee me that they hit their upside, then I would say the gap is closed. But in reality, 2 out of 4 of those players, half of the class, are projection players, right? Like we don't quite know what 2 out of 4 are going to be. We have high hopes. If you're guaranteeing me that they hit their ceiling, then it's an easy gap close. But for now, I'm going to say that it's getting close to closing the gap. It just is very dependent on just how much James and Hanafin can develop. Like that's the only question that I have right now.
Yeah. But I think that's the reason why you need a deep class. And I think that to me, the ceiling for Hanafin and James to me is the highest of the group. Right. But I think their floors are a little higher than maybe we're giving them credit for too, because they're so athletic.
Sure.
And it's like they're going to play. The question is, will they be stars or not? That's a question. But I think as a foursome, you have enough talent, you have enough depth, you have enough size, you have enough athleticism, and you have enough upside that it's definitely a gap closing class. Does it erase the gap? No. I mean, Ohio State just got commitments from Cardinal Tate, Brandon Innes, and Noah Rogers on top of a great receiver class last year in which they got, and the funny thing is like people always point to me like, oh, Caleb Burton. And I'm like, I didn't even grade Caleb Burton out as their best receiver last year. I didn't even have number 2. I mean, there was plenty of other guys that I liked more than they had last year. They got a kid from Georgia that I really liked, a slot guy. Loved Caleb Brown out of Chicago. And they got a kid from Arizona, that Keon Graves, that doesn't get nearly enough credit. And then they followed up with what they're about to follow it up with. It's about, you got to do it year after year after year. And until Notre Dame does it year after year after year, the gap isn't erased. I don't care how good this receiver class is. If you add Micah Tease to that, it closes it even more and to where you're close. But that's why the 2024 class is so important. Doing it 2 years in a row, along with getting Tobias Merriweather, with as much as I love everyone in this class, if I'm ranking the 5 kids in the 2023 class with Tobias Merriweather is still my number 1 player. Now, I have his senior film to evaluate as part of this conversation. We don't know how other guys are going to break out, correct? So for me, he's still that top guy, but you need the numbers in 2024. So that's why I feel like they have to follow up with another really strong class in 2024 in order to say, okay, the gap is closed.
Right.
So, yeah, that's my takeaway on that. So let's talk about that 2024 class.
Let's do it.
Okay, let's look at that group, and to me, this is going to be interesting because there's a lot of kids on the board right now, Ryan, but there's not a ton that I look at and say, oh, yeah, Notre Dame's going to get that guy.
Right.
But I would also say they're way ahead on a lot of these guys than they were at the same time a year ago. I mean, up until January when the new staff took over, Notre Dame wasn't even on the radar for Braylon James and Jaden Greathouse. Or Rico Flores. I mean, they weren't even on the radar. Rico to a degree, but not really. I mean, Braylon James, the guy that had an offer, but they never recruited. Glenn James, Braylon's dad, said on a show with you that they even tried to reach out to Notre Dame and they wouldn't return a phone call. So they're way ahead of where they were, but there's no one that I look at outside of maybe Cam Williams that I say, yeah, if I was a betting man right now, I'd put my mortgage on that guy picking Notre Dame. Right? Like that's the thing. So let's first start with Cam Williams, and then we'll kind of dive into some other names to know and kind of where things stand. But Cam Williams, obviously a wide receiver from Illinois. It's going to decide Wednesday night, 8:00 Eastern, I believe. We'll have that show. We'll carry that live. We'll discuss, he's going to pick between, what is it? It's Notre Dame, Michigan, Iowa, Wisconsin, and was it Michigan State? Cincinnati.
Yep.
So we like where Notre Dame stands. We won't dive too much into that because we'll let him kind of have his moment. But as a player, this is a kid that I really like. I really like Cam Williams because I think he brings some boundary to the table. I think he brings some X to the table. He's 6'1 plus. He's smooth. He runs a lot faster than people think as well. He was a kid that we talked about this at Irish Invasion. He lines up and runs. He's, again, rising junior, and they're doing 40 times before the Irish Invasion. And let me tell you something. Notre Dame doesn't publicize the 40 times, which like Ohio State gives kids cards with like the 40 times on them, and they like publicize it to a degree. And some of the times you're like, yeah, I've seen that kid run 40 times other places, and that's way faster than he's running anywhere else. So it's like, okay, it's
fast
for
track.
it's for the
I know.
it's a recruiting thing. Notre Dame puts a lot of value at their Irish Invasion on accuracy because it's going to impact who they're recruiting or not. And how guys have run has had a lot to do with Paul Moala running a 4.45 is why Notre Dame offered him, right, at the Irish Invasion.
Yep.
So I was standing there watching Cam Williams run, and he was smooth and he was moving quickly. And I'm like, yeah, that kid was moving pretty good, right? Now, and you see it on film, right? But then you see it up close in person. And then as soon as he finished, the Notre Dame coaches started doing like this, started showing each other their stopwatches. Like, what did you get? What did you get? And you and I talk about this. The reason you're doing that is because, oh my gosh, I just had him in the 4.4s. Did you have him in the 4.4s? Did you have him in the 4.4s? And they all did. And then he ran it again, and it was the same thing. And I think that was the final straw for Notre Dame. Is they loved this film, they loved his size. You listen to him talk about the things he's interested in, and you're like, man, that's a Notre Dame kid, right? Like, he just kind of comes across that way. But does he check out at the event with the size? Yeah, size checked out. Really good looking kid. Speed checked out. Competitiveness checked out. He was in all that. He kept jumping in and taking reps and trying to battle and doing all that kind of stuff. He checked all the boxes. But to me, the thing that really put him over the top for me was when I could see the speed verified at the camp. I was like, okay, my eyes aren't deceiving me. This kid can run.
Right.
And I think that's the thing that really has him as more of a, like we said before, he's a definitive top 150 kid. No question. I think he's more of a top 100 kid, but we could have a conversation about 150. This is a really good football player and would be a great way to start this class for Notre Dame at receiver if they can get him on Wednesday night.
I think the smoothest thing is the easiest thing that pops off to me on film, Brian, is because I think that people might underestimate how fast he is because he's just he kills you with the smoothness, right? He's one of those guys that's truly deceptive with his speed. It's like, just looks like he's gliding out there a little bit, and then he stacks and he gets on top of you. You're like, oh, he's got another gear here, man. Like, he's a 4.4 type of athlete. So I like him a lot, man. Like you said, I think he's definitely a guy that can play to the field.
Yeah.
But he's also a guy that I think sort of the Lorenzo style type of boundary, right? Like,
he's already bigger than Lorenzo now. Like, True. I don't know if he was on I like what you saw, Ryan, was sophomore film. You're going off of sophomore film, and I get that.
Yep.
What I'm saying is when I saw him in person, now that it's been 5-6 months since the sophomore film was over, you see that's what makes valuing sophomore film challenging because these are still young kids. And then you see him and he's kind of filled out muscularly. He's got long arms. Like, okay, this kid's already bigger than Lorenzo now.
It's crazy.
And he's still got 2 years of high school football left. So I like the Lorenzo comparison that you made based on film, but that's the thing about the W. I want you to get back into the W. I just wanted to kind of throw out there that he's already kind of surpassed Lorenzo size-wise, in my opinion. I see the comp as sophomores, but he's already gone past that. So please go back to your explanation. You were talking about how, yes, he can play X, but that's not it.
Right. Yeah. I think the biggest thing for me is he's a flexible athlete. He's got speed. And that's why I think that he can play to the X a little bit into the boundary, at the W position for Notre Dame, because he can challenge vertically. He can stack and he can get on top of dudes. And it's extremely deceptive in the speed profile that he brings to the game. And that is so valuable, the ability to play both outside spots. And there's just, again, like I keep coming back to the same word, but smooth. He kind of lulls you to sleep a little bit, man. He could be a good deep threat. And he could be a good deep threat just simply off the fact that he runs a 4.4, but he also knows how to set you up deep, right? Like, he knows how to stack you and then get on top of you and then kind of lull you to, to the down the green line and then all to the sideline late with hands and doing all that type of stuff. So there's some nuance to him as a vertical receiver. I think most of the time we talk about nuance, people think as a pure route runner, right? Like, oh, he's a short intermediate separator, but there's also nuance to running vertically based routes, right? And he kind of has that. He averages over 18 yards a catch for his high school. And I imagine that he's going to be a similar style at Notre Dame, where he's going to be a big play threat. I think he's going to be able to do all those things where from a vertical based system, he has the speed and kind of the nuance to running those vertical base routes where he's going to create a lot of big plays, in my opinion.
He is another guy that I really like in the 2024 class, and a guy that, to me, when I look at the 2024 class, who's the elite guy, who's the impact guy, who's the really dynamic type of guy, and a guy that's on the board that I think fits that mold is Ryan Wingo. And the interesting thing is when this whole thing first took over, a lot of staffs that have been kind of working together for a while were staffs that had, got on him early. And the Notre Dame staff had to kind of figure out what was going on with their 23 board in January, much less getting on 24 kids. And so they got on Wingo later. I mean, I remember you and I, when I first hired you, one of the first guys that you and I talked about, I want you to get on in 24, was Ryan Wingo. And he said, it was like after about a month, hey, look, here's the reality of it. They haven't talked to me a whole lot. Well, that's changed in the last couple months, and Notre Dame was able to get him on campus. And, I think it's a situation where they're going to play from behind a little bit, but Ryan, from you and I talking, the natural fit of him and Notre Dame is going to help make them a legitimate player in this recruitment.
He's a Notre Dame kid. I mean, it's just point blank, just talking to his coach in the past, the kid is an incredibly thoughtful, high academic kid. And he is using right now the recruiting process to go see things, right? Like that's what his biggest thing is. It's not just finding the right fit right now. It's the ability for him to use this thing that has been that he has earned to see everything. Right. And that's not so much as like seeing the other schools. He wants to see places. He wants to go out places. He wants to experience. That's like the biggest thing for Ryan Wingo right now, because there's some connections to like we talked about this recently, like Arkansas. He has his older brother, Ronnie Wingo, played running back at Arkansas. So there's some connection to the program. But I think that Ryan Wingo is very adamant that he's testing everything and he's going to take a look everywhere. And the fact of the matter is that he's been on campus at Notre Dame twice already, and he was not supposed to go back last week. The original plan was, I saw Notre Dame, let's go see other places this spring and summer. I want to see places I haven't seen before. And he made it a priority while he's on his Midwest tour. Like, no, let's go back to Notre Dame. Let's go see it again. And he connected well with the staff. I'm told that his parents absolutely loved it. Both his mother and his father went there. And I think that Notre Dame is a real player for Ryan Wingo. Is it going to be tough? Absolutely. Everybody's going to be after Ryan Wingo. This kid is a legit 5-star level talent, 6'2", 195 pounds, dynamic player out of the state of Missouri. It's going to be a battle. But Notre Dame has shown us already, this staff, that they are not afraid of a challenge, right? So I like where they are with Ryan Wingo early on in the process. It's going to be a battle, but hats off to Notre Dame for not backing down to the competition right now for him.
Well, this is one of those situations, Ryan, where him not wanting to rush into a decision is good for Notre Dame, because 100%. They did start off late. And again, that's not a criticism, because I think a lot of it, there were some easy, make sense ones. And guys that Coach Stuckey had already been recruiting, Emmett Mosley, we'll talk about in a minute, who's, mom and dad both played at Notre Dame, and there's some easy fits, but, he was one that it took a while to get on. And I think part of the reason it took him a while to get on him is because he is such a highly ranked player. We really have a shot with that guy, or, if we're getting in that late, but he does. And he's a fit. As you mentioned, his brother obviously played at Arkansas, was a running back at Arkansas. So obviously the DNA is there, right? I mean, so, there's obviously some ability there. And I was trying to go back and look at what some of Ronnie Wingo's numbers were back then. But, I think that
I don't think his production was great, but Ronnie Wingo was a freak. He was like a 6'3", 230-pound running back. And I think he tested really well too.
Yeah. So he ended up rushing for over 1,000 yards in his career. Never had more than 450 yards. But again, averaged 5.3 yards a carry, and was always part of the rotation at Arkansas, I remember, but was never like the guy. But the point is, size and athleticism runs in the family, and that's certainly something. Ronnie got plenty of that. You're looking at some other guys on the board, Ryan. Again, it's early yet, but here's some other names to know. Micah Hudson from Texas is definitely a name to know. Braylon James and he have been working out together, not like working out like, hey, Micah, let's go work out. But they kind of work with the same trainer type of situation. And so they've been spending time together. And obviously, Mike has heard plenty about Notre Dame in his conversations with Braylon James, who is one of those guys that is not afraid to tell anyone that he can, that will listen about how great Notre Dame is, which is another reason why it's so important to get those kind of kids, because the best advertising for your program when you're talking about from regions that are far away is to have kids from there that are willing to talk about it.
Yep. And I have a comparison for Micah Hudson. He is a really talented player. I put it in the mailbag this week. He reminds me a lot of Garrett Wilson, man. He is a springy, explosive athlete. He is a really impressive football player. And like you said, Notre Dame has continued to recruit the state of Texas. I know you used Braylon James as a comparison. It's a priority. Getting a guy like a Micah Hudson would be absolutely huge for Notre Dame class, because this kid, he brings something different, Brian. You want to talk about a guy that I think could play to the field and in the slot and be dynamic both in the slot as well. In the yak ability that he brings after the catch, and the ability for the speed that he has to kind of take the top off the defense. That kid's a multi-level threat. Micah Hudson has special traits as a football player.
Mm-hmm. No doubt. He's a guy that obviously that's going to be tough, right? But they're in the game, and that's the important thing, is get yourself in the game. Some other names to know. Emmett Mosley's a really interesting kid because he's very talented, didn't play a lot as a sophomore, had some injuries, he's transferring schools, has been on the road visiting, but we don't know that he's visited Notre Dame. But I know his younger brother has been on campus this summer. He was at a camp. He earned a scholarship offer as like a 25 or 26 kid. And so I don't know if Emmett was with him on that trip or if he was somewhere else. He won't talk to the media. Like, we haven't been able, at least not us. We have not had any luck getting a hold of him. So I don't know where things stand with him in Notre Dame. I know Notre Dame offered him, and from everything I've been told, they like him. Yeah. But they got to get that one figured out.
I haven't seen anything about Emmett Mosley on any platform, right. Man. I guess maybe it might just not be a media guy, which is unfortunate for us. But
So, like somebody asked, wasn't he here for the spring game? I don't know. He hasn't said. There was talk that he was going to, but he never confirmed. He never followed up afterwards with us. I mean, so, and we don't report what other people report. That's not really how this is supposed to work. You don't take what other people report. You have to confirm what you report, and he hasn't been able to. He hasn't commented on us. I don't really have a lot to say about him other than he's really athletic, and he's really fast, and he's really talented.
And he's a double legacy.
Double legacy. Mom retired as the all-time goal scorer on the soccer team. Dad played for Lou Holtz back in the day. So, yeah, definitely you'd like to think that Notre Dame has a shot there, but I don't know. I really don't have a clue. I'm not sure another guy that's on the board that I really like, and some people have asked about slot receivers. We had a lot of questions about slot receivers. And we also had a super chat from Brandon. He says, who are the more of the slot targets in 24? Notre Dame has to find at least one slot receiver in 24, especially they miss on Tease. I agree with you. I think the one thing that we have to make sure that we're defining slot correctly. I think Notre Dame needs more after the catch guys, but that's not the only type of slots that they have. Right. There are a lot of these guys. Michael Hudson, I think, is a slot kind of guy. I think
can play there
in a pro style slot. I mean, he can do things after the catch. He's very smooth. He can work vertically. He can definitely be a slot. Another guy that I really like in the slot, Ryan, and he's not your prototypical slot in that, you're just going to throw a million, RPOs to him, but he could do those things too, is an in-state kid. And that's Mylan Graham. I don't know if you feel the same way. We honestly have not talked about this, but when I look at guys that I like in the slot, he's one of the first guys that I think about, because he does have a lot of after the catch speed and ability.
Yeah.
But he does it but he's also 6 foot plus. So he's not your typical slot, but I'm telling you, I really like that kid, and he can flat out run. He was one of the more impressive athletes at the Irish Invasion, and his high school film is really important. He's one of those in-state kids. I feel like, man, if you can find kids like that can run, that's a nice problem to have, or a nice situation to be in. He's a kid that I don't think that I think we're going to be talking a lot more in the next 6 to 8 months as he kind of gets into his junior season.
I could not agree more. He's a kid that I thought equally as impressive was his ability to break angles in the open field as it was the ability to carry vertically as well. This kid is really fast, man. He might be one of the, I mean, aside from like Zion Reagans, he may be one of the fastest players on the board for Notre Dame. He is a dynamic player. There's no doubt about it. Both just before the catch and after the catch, the kid can move. He's a different type of slot to your, like he's not a make you miss slot. He's a
right. He's not Xavier Bradshaw. Right.
Right. He's more, wow, I caught the football. There's a crease right there. I'm going to hit it because I'm really fast and explosive. Like that's the way that he kind of navigates. But and we talked about it, right? You have to consistently identify the players in the state of Indiana that you like that are fits at Notre Dame, and you need to close on them. So if you look, if Notre Dame looks at Milan Graham and says that guy's a fit for us, you have to close. Like there's no excuses not to get an in-state kid if he fits everything you want and you want him on your football team.
Right.
There's been some guys that Notre Dame has misevaluated from the state of Indiana. It happens, but it has happened, right? If this kid is that type of player, you can't misidentify him. You can't misevaluate him. You have to keep him in the state.
Agree. I like Milan Graham a lot. And the interesting thing with him is going to be if you get Cam Williams and you get Milan Graham, then how many numbers are you taking in 2024?
Right.
Because if they take 5 in 23, can you take 4 in 24? It's going to get interesting. And there's a lot of really talented players on the board. I don't know if you've had a chance, Ryan, to watch Bredo Richardson from Florida yet. Oh, I love that kid. You got to watch this film. Obviously, he's a kid that visited Notre Dame recently. He is not a burner, but he's athletic. He's a bigger kid. He plays bigger. He plays like an outside guy. He's one of my favorite guys on the board. I think he likes Notre Dame, but I also think he's got a little Cardinal Tate in him, and I mean this as a compliment. And because one of the things I've said about Cardinal is Cardinal's a really savvy kid when it comes to engaging with multiple fan bases and kind of showing love to a lot of different schools that are recruiting him and growing his social media presence. And again, I say this as 100% as a compliment. So don't anyone try to take this as a negative because I've always commended Cardinal for that. But he is a really unique type of young man. And he visited recently and things went really, really well. Long way to go on that one. But he's a kid that, to me, I say is a kid to keep an eye on moving forward.
Yeah. And I know I'm seeing a couple people in the chat, Brian, so I just want to clarify. We're not talking about Bronte Johnson today during the podcast because Notre Dame is recruiting him as a safety, the in-state, not as wide receiver, just so everyone's aware of that one.
Right. And now if you want to ask about Bronte, we can do that in the Q&A, but we're not going to talk about his receiver. And look, the reason why, Ryan and I were talking about this before the show, Bronte is a very athletic player. He doesn't catch the ball really well.
Yep.
And that's why I think, I like him a lot as a player, but it's more as a defensive player for that reason.
For sure. Yep.
But he's very talented and a guy that obviously Notre Dame was able to offer. We'll see kind of how things fill out, but he's an interesting player. Another guy, Ryan, we had some intel on him on the board today, is Jeremiah McClellan from Christian Brothers School in the St. Louis area.
Yep.
He's now made, I think, a couple trips to Notre Dame this spring and some winter and spring.
Thing too, yep.
And he's a guy that Notre Dame likes a lot. He obviously was able to go on and make the trips. Notre Dame likes him. He's talked about getting back on campus. He's an interesting player, Ryan. What are your thoughts on where Notre Dame is right now with Jeremiah McClellan?
Yeah, Jeremiah he makes the job really easy, man. He's very open and honest with everything, which is great. He's obviously the teammate of 2023 running back target, athlete target, wherever you want to quantify him at. Jeremiah Love. McClellan has similar style to Cam Williams to a degree, right? Like he's really smooth, has some speed, but he just kind of lulls you to sleep a little bit. But I think they're in a good spot with him. The biggest question for me is, and you already mentioned it, Brian, is how many receivers can you take in this class, right? So if you hit on Cam Williams and you hit on a Ronnie Wingo and you hit on a couple other guys, is there going to be room? Right. In my opinion, he's a top 150 caliber wide
all
receiver.
These kids are really. That's the great thing about it.
Yeah. And he might, and we might be in a situation where maybe there's just not enough room. It's no disrespect. Right. Maybe you love him still,
right?
But what number are you able to take? So I think Notre Dame's in a good spot. The question is just what are the numbers going to look like at the board at the end of the day?
Right. Because there comes a point in time with a lot of these slots, it's going to be first come, first serve to a degree. And then there's going to be a couple guys they're going to save a spot for. Like, yeah, we're not going to fill up until this guy makes a decision, and I think that's going to be interesting. Some of these kids that really want to get Notre Dame but want to go through the process may find themselves without a spot, because not every, and this isn't about Jeremiah McClellan, but there are some kids on this board, a lot of kids on this board, that aren't going to get the same treatment as like a Ryan Wingo or a Micah Hudson, who are those kind of guys like, yeah, we'll take them whenever, At some point in time, some of these kids' spots are going to fill up, right? And that's just kind of the reality of it. Another thing about the slots is another kid to keep an eye on is the Jason Robinson kid, right? From I think he goes to Poly, correct? In Long Beach, Poly.
Yes,
I think he's a Poly kid. He's currently committed to USC, but he talks to Notre Dame and has said he plans on visiting Notre Dame. So we'll see if that happens or not. But we're not going to talk about him too much until he visits. If he does follow through with the visit, we'll see about that, and then we may talk about him a little bit more. But Nicholas Marsh is another kid on the board, Ryan. It doesn't, seems like Notre Dame is recruiting him. It doesn't seem that as of right now that he's being that there's a strong of a connection on one of the sides. I'm not sure which one, as maybe some other kids. And he visited back in April. Was it April? I think he visited March or April, sometime around then.
April sounds right. Yep.
And liked it, said good things, but hasn't been back. Hasn't said a lot of things about Notre Dame since. It's been a little tough to get a hold of in regards to talking to him. So I'm not quite sure where things stand there. So that's why we haven't talked a lot about him. He's a good player. He's got the name Megatron. He's a good player. He's a top 200 guy, but I need to see more junior film of him before I'm ready to say, okay, yes, that's a guy that you're going to push for.
Yeah, he's a big boundary kid that wins above the rim. I'm not sure what type of athlete he is yet. Mm-hmm. So I agree. I need to see a little bit more of Nick Marsh. But again, we're talking about another good football player that might not be a take for Notre Dame at the end of the day, which is pretty crazy to think about.
We're going to dive into some questions here, and there's other kids on the board, but those are mainly like there's Tice here, Denmark, there's Jeremiah Smith. There's a lot of other guys, but we just don't think those guys are as interested in Notre Dame right now as maybe some of these other players. So we'll get into a little bit more of that here as we kind of dive into this offseason. But these are some early names to know as far as what Notre Dame's looking for. Before we move on to the Q&A, Ryan, I do want to – the huddle is back up now.
Nice.
So I would like to kind of dive into this film of Rico Flores and just kind of break his game down a little bit. I'd like to start with this game right here is against De La Salle. So I want to watch the De La Salle film, Ryan, and we'll just kind of show what we're talking about. Because, again, I don't care a ton about competition in regards to I'm not going to ding a kid for not playing great competition. But I like watching a kid when they do play against good competition. It just gives you lets you see kind of what they can do. And so let's dive a little bit to Rico Flores. You're going to see him here. He's the team in white. Folsom is the road team here. This route alone just kind of shows you just this is a kid that understands manipulating speed to try to get free, stacks the guy up, tracks the ball well. Watch when he looks back for the ball, you see him slightly slow down, but then he immediately starts to accelerate. And really tracks the deep ball extremely well. He catches the ball very, very well. His ball skills, Ryan, are really, really impressive.
Yeah, I just love how he stacks guys, man. He understands that, like, I need to use their momentum against them, right? And that he just does a beautiful job of that consistently on film.
Does a great job staying level here. He doesn't drift upfield on this in cut, catches the ball, and takes a shot. But he hangs onto the ball.
And that's why I think – yeah, and that's why I think he could play a little bit in the slot, man. He's got some toughness to him, and I think he's got like a sturdiness. I don't think he's going to create like a ton of explosive plays, but I think he's just going to be that kid that you can depend on in the slot.
I've had a couple people I know say that they think that I underrate his athleticism, and that could be, and maybe he's one of those guys that he's just so smooth that I don't see the explosiveness as to what's there. This is a really nice stop and cut. Really sinks those hips well there. Makes that catch. He's in a lot of traffic there, Ryan.
I know. He's a fluid kid, man. He's gets in and out of breaks pretty well. I like how he sets things up.
Sells this deep route really well. Like this corner is absolutely sold that it's going to be a go route. I mean, and then you see the ball skills. Really nice. I mean, it's against De La Salle. I mean, you know what I mean? Like this is a really good football team. He's playing both ways. Look at that football IQ there. Look at him read the quarterback. He knows, and I don't know if this is the quarterback. It doesn't look like him physically, but De La Salle's quarterback signed with Michigan State.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if that's him in this particular film, or maybe he didn't play this game, or he was out at that point in time, but he was a really good football player. Love the stalk. Look at that stalk block technique, though. You're talking about being fundamentally – the kid's even fundamentally sound as a blocker. Look at that. Eats up the cushion, gets downfield, because in stalk blocking, ideally, it's off coverage. You want to engage that guy as far downfield as possible.
Oh, for sure.
Look at this. I thought it looks like he's running a route. Like, he comes off the line like he's running a route. Gets that corner to sink, stalk, and then just bam. I love that. I love that competitiveness, but also the technique is just really excellent. That's him going against Cooper.
Oh, yeah, it is. You're right. Good call.
Look at him taking on a 6'5", 240-pound tight end. I love that competitiveness. Love that competitiveness. Look at this release. This is great. Look at this hard outside jab to get that corner opened up, and then just comes right in. That's better than what kids at Notre Dame were doing last year, which is great for Rico, but also an indictment of how poorly coached the Notre Dame receivers were last year.
Yep. Again, if we're talking about him as a potential slot at points, I think, and I love that stem, by the way, on that last one.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of sets him up outside, but you see there's just a sturdiness working inside, and he's not going to make guys miss a ton, but he's a guy that's like, he's a north-south runner after he gets the football. He's like, I'm taking it right there. Right. I'm getting what I can get out of it. And
it's the difference, right? It's the difference between like a college spread slot, which is Amari Rodgers, right? It's guys like that. It's Caleb Brown, who I absolutely loved in last year's class from Chicago. And then there's the pro style slots, which is what we're talking about with Rico Flores and to a degree, Mylan Graham. This is his junior film in general. Just let me make sure it's highest res. Okay, it is. So this is a little bit of Rico's junior film. You can kind of see, again, this shows he's a good athlete, but this isn't like, to me, I just don't see like super, super burner explosive, but good athleticism and a great feel for the game. Just a tremendous feel for the game as a player.
Now he's going to win. He's going to win because I think he can win down the field a little bit, but I think it's much more going to be about
this stuff right
how
here.
To set stuff up. Yeah, exactly.
This is a great example, Ryan. Talk him through this route and to show this is what we're talking about, because the top end's the final. Let me explain this. So there's three different parts of a route that get you to your final breaking point. There's the stance and start, which is one, right? Like it's how quickly, how efficiently you get off the ball. That's where he's at right now. This is what we call the stem, right? And the stem is essentially it's the period where you're releasing off the ball to get to the top of your route. You have your, it's like, so if I'm running a 10-yard curl route, the stem is that from the release to the top to that 10-yard mark where you're going to then make your break. What you do with that stem is very important, and that's what a lot of young receivers miss. And there's two things that I always taught my receivers. Number one is you almost always, the rule was always, but then I would teach the exceptions. You always attack the leverage of a defender. If he's playing you inside, there's a reason. You want to attack the area that he's trying to take away from you to get him to overreact to that. And then you want to attack the outside shoulder. And so this is a lot of receivers just kind of release vertical. Or if a guy's inside, they'll say, well, he's taking that away. I'll just release outside. That's what he wants you to do. What I like about him is that he understands the importance of all aspects of that. So the stance, start, stem, just kind of, so the point is, and then you get to the top end. The top end is the move you make to get into and out of your cut. That's the top end. So I want people to understand that. A lot of players, Ryan, the focus is on the top end, and they don't put enough emphasis on the other part. So I want you to break this route down now that we've identified the terms and explain to people why it may not look like much, but why this is such a really good route and shows an understanding of how to play by Rico Flores.
Yeah. Well, you see off the line of scrimmage, no wasted movement, no false steps, gets in. You see how he attacked outside leverage there. You see the cornerback is playing him on the inside, just playing him to the outside. When he is able to make his stem to force him to the outside, you see how the corner overreacts and kind of vacates his leverage, and that allows Rico to run right past him for the deep post route here.
Once that guy kind of flips his hips like that, Rico knows he's got him beat.
It's over.
The other key is what a lot of receivers will do is the moment he flips his hips, they then react and go. What Rico does here that I like too, Ryan, is he continues to eat up the cushion. He doesn't make his break inside. He knows the guy's beat, but you got to stay patient with your technique. He gets inside and then he outruns the guy. Because if you break to the post and he's still flipping his hips, this guy has no chance. No chance. And that's also how separation gets created. It's not just with raw speed. It's if you can get a guy going one way and you're going the other way, guess what? I'm going to win that battle. You know what I mean? So, and you absolutely see that here from Rico.
And that's a perfect example too, Brian, because it's like that play, it's good solid speed. Like it's good, but the reason that he was able to create that much separation was not because of his just straight line speed. It was the fact that he understood how to set him up.
This is example of him getting to top speed in a hurry. And that's one thing he does really well. It doesn't like Will Fuller was a 4.32, but he needed a few steps to kind of get going. Once he got going, but whoo boy. But Rico gets to full speed like now. And this corner is like not expecting him to get on him that quickly. Really late reacting because of how quickly he gets on him.
He tracks that one really well too down the field.
He does that extremely well.
That's not an easy one. Over the shoulder like that, it's not easy.
And he doesn't slow down. He really doesn't slow down. You know, it's one of the things I had to teach college receivers. One of the things they would hear me say about as much as anything else was accelerate through the look back. Because what happens is when guys look back for the ball, they have a tendency to slow down. It's just your body's automatic reaction. So you have to emphasize, accelerate through the look back. And I think Rico does a really nice job of that. This is really good ball skills right here. Route wasn't quite as crisp, but really, really good. This is a good one too. He knows so what he knows right now, Ryan, he knows this is probably cover 2, right? So you've watched the film. You see this pure cover 2 a lot more in high school than you do in college, but he knows the guy's going to play him outside. So he just widens the guy out with that first release, gets that guy jumping, gets inside of him. But when he gets inside, look what he does. He gets back outside. What a lot of players will do is when they make this inside move right here, so he's kind of on the outside part of the numbers. Well, in cover 2, this corner wants to funnel you back inside to his help. So you've got this guy right here is a hook curl player. So if you're going to run a hook or a curl, he's going to play it. This guy's playing the post. This corner is basically playing the flats, and he's protecting against outside cuts. He has help inside. He's okay with you releasing inside. Well, what a lot of receivers will do is they'll take that free release. So he makes his jab, and then when they get inside, he'll stay kind of on the inside of these numbers. But what Rico does a nice job of here, Ryan, is he will take the inside release, but then you'll see him immediately start to widen back out with a stem to the point where when the ball comes, he's back outside. Now the ball takes him back inside. But look, he's now at the bottom of the numbers again. And that just shows me a kid that understands the need for spacing. Because if you start getting too far inside, the safety becomes a player. Now, this worked in high school, but in college, this ball might get picked off because the quarterback threw it too far inside. But that wasn't because of Rico. Rico got himself back outside because you want as much distance from the safety as possible. And he does a really, really nice job with that.
Yep.
Really nice job with that.
Another nice adjustment down the field. Another ball that's not very easy to catch.
He tracks it really, really well, Ryan. And this isn't a great route. I think this guy's inside of him. I like to see him kind of squeeze down on him, then stem him back up. But he does use his hands well there to get over top. But I just love that. I love the concentration on the football is really what I like. We saw that one earlier. Saw the De La Salle stuff. I love the fact, too, that even in high school, he plays all over. He plays boundary, he plays field, he plays slot. Nice focus there. He climbs a little bit more than I'd like to see him climb, which allows that corner to undercut him a little bit. I'd like him to kind of level that off just a little bit more. This guy right here doesn't threaten him. He doesn't need to climb over top of that guy as much as he does, but he still does a great job of focusing on the ball and bringing it in.
Yeah, he's got really solid hands overall. Not even solid, just good hands.
Yeah, really good hands. Yeah. Some more De La Salle stuff. Good. Now here he is as the slot in a 3x1. This is what we're talking about. Like, does a nice job of just quickly getting that guy to release, flip his hips, gets back inside. Great concentration on the ball.
It's a great release.
Yeah,
great release.
Really smart, savvy kid.
And you saw how he kind of widened his angle a little bit on that last one too to get over top of the linebacker to get into space.
It's a great route. Sells that post effectively. Gets a little high at the top, but I mean, against the junior high school, it's a great route for junior high school. But look how he uses his head to really kind of, you see him snap his head the opposite direction. He's doing all the tricks to try to get that kid to bite. This kid really knows how to play the game. He's a really savvy football player. Look at him getting inside. He sees zone. He's got to work inside on an in cut. So he's got to work. Because now he's more worried about this guy on this in cut. He's playing off of this guy, not the corner. So He is attacking the stem of the defender, and he sees that the guy widens out. He flips inside of him, finds that zone, and catches the football.
He also delayed his break a little bit on that last one to make sure the linebacker climbed with him so they can cut across his face. If he cuts a little bit too early, then you're going to cut right into the linebacker's leverage, and it's a no play.
And you give your route away.
Yep.
Really nice release again. Get that sucker outside, bam, widen him. And the reason this is important, because he could take an inside. This corner's not really taking the outside away that well. He could get a relatively clean inside release by squeezing down inside. But the problem is once you do that, you're now running into these guys, right? By keeping that distance off the edge, you get into a situation where you're able to keep that distance and that space from the inside because you got to stay away from those guys. His body language as a receiver is great, meaning there's a lot of it. I like that. I actually kind of like those guys that are naturally kind of, use their head and their shoulders and things like that to get open. Really nice catch there. That it's a nice back shoulder. It's not a great ball. Actually, it is a great ball because if he leads him here, I didn't see that safety coming to the mix at the last second. So this is a nice ball. Rico does a great job of getting around to it. This kid can play. This is really savvy. Look at him coming level there, Ryan. Doesn't drift. Really comes level. He starts to it. I thought he was going to drift at first. Kind of rounds this off a lot, and then he levels off and goes and makes the play.
Some easy flexibility to him as a route runner too. Like he's very technically sound. He kind of he's got the understanding of how to run routes, and he's also flexible enough to do everything that he needs to do. Strong hands.
It's another really good route. He's just getting these kids thinking, I'm going to go here, and then he doesn't.
This is the kind of kid, too, where although he's not – I mean, he's, listed at like 6'1", 190, so he's probably actually around 6 foot-ish, whatever. But he's the type of kid where, although he's not the biggest kid in the world, he could be a red zone weapon because he just makes guys look silly in man-to-man coverage near the end zone, you know?
Yep. He's got really quick hands. You can see it there. Just gets the hands up quickly, snatches that ball out. Strong hands. He's caught a couple balls like this that are high and hot. That's the hardest pass to catch in football, in my opinion. The high heat from a short distance is because it gets on you so quickly, and you have nothing but your hands to use to catch the ball. Really nice catch. This is really good because this corner shows really good patience. Like this corner is not giving away, not overreacting to the first move like other guys. And Rico shows some patience on his own. Then he gets vertical, widens back out, and then breaks inside. And he could stem it out a little bit more, but he also, like you said, Ryan, he doesn't fly inside. Look how slow he is out of his break. That's on purpose.
It's pacing. Yep.
Yes, because if he comes screaming out of there, like you mentioned earlier, he's running right into that linebacker.
He has a good understanding of space and pacing into his routes. Not everything has to be full speed. You have to understand what leverage am I attacking? Where's the open space? How quickly are defenders going to get there? There's a lot to it.
Look how many dudes there are that he gets between. It's like 4 dudes up in the first level, and then there's another guy coming over top. Really savvy player. Again, not the athlete maybe some of these other guys are, but you're talking about a kid that knows how to play the game of football. This kid, he's, in my opinion, even more so than Jaden Greathouse, I think he's the most polished receiver on the board right now.
It's fair.
I think Jaden's able to get away with things because he's so big that Rico can't. But as far as just pure polish, he's extremely polished. I love the fact that he plays defense too.
I do too. I mean, is there going to be anybody if Rico Flores does end up with Notre Dame? Is there anybody on the roster or coming in that's going to have a better release packages than he does right now? I mean,
no. It just depends on how quickly he does show some nice. This is a nice turn. Like this is actually a pretty clean turn.
Yeah,
for a receiver, especially. Really, like I said, this is how this kid grew on me. Because at first I'm like, oh, okay, he's not real big, he's not super fast, he's a good athlete, but not an elite athlete. Then you start to get into the little parts of the game, and you're like, man, this kid, knocks one dude down, goes and blocks another.
He's got some tenacity.
He does.
Yeah.
He's got some swagger. There's no doubt about it.
Which is so funny because he's like the most soft-spoken, nice kid ever, too. And then he does stuff like that. It's fantastic.
Yep. Because I heard he's a pretty quiet on visits, thoughtful kid.
Mm-hmm.
Somebody asked if Chris Olave is a fair. Alex Rohr asked, is Chris Olave a fair comparison?
Yeah, I don't think he's as fast as Olave, but I did kind of throw that comparison out a little bit earlier, just with his style of play. Yeah, I think just the craftiness and the nuance that he plays with. I think that's why he wins so much vertically in high school too, is the fact that he just understands how to set things up.
And I'll say this: we're gonna wrap up his film now because this kid was incredibly productive.
Yep.
In high school as well. He was over 80 catches and over 1,000 yards. Correct?
Yes. Yep.
If I remember correctly. So the production is certainly there. A lot to like about Rico Flores. I'll say this: every year, Ryan, we see it with kids that, who he reminds me a lot of coming out of high school. And this is going to sound funny. As a high school player, he's very similar to Will Fuller. Because if you remember coming out of high school, Will Fuller was a 4.5 guy, low to mid 4.5 guy. He said it. I was at the opening a few years ago. I've said this before on the show, and they were going through times that guys had at the opening. Now, keep in mind, the opening constantly, in my opinion, inflates 40 times. That or all these kids go to the opening as high school players get slower when they get to the NFL Combine. One of the two is true, right? And they were talking about Will Fuller being I think it was a mid to high 4.5. He just is one of those kids that just for whatever reason got to college and got faster, but very similar body type to what Will Fuller had, although Rico's a little bit thicker, similar length. Will was a really shifty route runner coming out of high school. That's the thing. Will was not a burner in high school. He was a really good back shoulder guy, could kind of get open, played some corner. I think Penn State was talking to him about maybe playing corner because he was originally committed to Penn State. No one recruited Will Fuller to come to Notre Dame. Notre Dame did not recruit him thinking he'd be a burner. That didn't show up till he got to Notre Dame. That's something that makes Rico really interesting is that he does have some of those attributes. If he does get fast, no, he's not going to become Will Fuller. I'm not saying that. As a high school kid, he reminds me of Will Fuller.
I don't know. I heard it. It's on the podcast.
Stop it. If he does get to that point where there is a little bit of a jump in quickness, I think that's where you could see his floor take an even bigger jump, or his ceiling take a bigger jump, because that's really the thing that's missing, right? The size is plenty good, big enough. Especially the way the NFL is right now, size is plenty good enough for outside and inside.
He's bigger than Chris Olave, which we were just asked about. Chris Olave was 180 pounds soaking wet.
And he's not a slot guy. He can play slot, but he was an outside guy as well.
Mm-hmm.
So certainly a guy that I think can do a lot of those things. So that's going to do it for the receiver portion of this podcast, Ryan. So we're going to dive into a Q&A here in a minute, but that's obviously wraps up the receiver situation. Again, as we close it out, got to finish strong in 23, but you got to repeat it in 24. They can't have a great 23 class and then just kind of do okay in 24. They have to be willing to say, hey, we're going to go through this and we're going to load up on the best we can now and then do the same thing next year. What Notre Dame would do in the past, and this is what we're going to learn about this staff, they would have that great class, but then they'd say, okay, well, we had this great class, so let's maybe focus on other things next year. That's not what Bama does. That's not what Georgia does. That's not what Ohio State does. They say, okay, we had a great class last year. Let's make this one even better.
Sure.
And that's what I want to see from the staff, to see if they really have what it takes to really build an elite championship roster. And I think receiver is going to be a perfect example of that. So I think closing on some of these guys over the next couple weeks will help that, because once they start to really lock in the 23 class, then that helps them kind of then start focusing even more on the 24 kids for Coach Stuckey and Coach Reese. So we'll see how that closes out. So that's going to do it for the receiver part of the podcast. We'll jump to the Q&A in a minute, but before we do, remember, Notre Dame fans, before we get to that, hit that like button for us, please. Hit that subscribe button, hit that notification bell, and of course, share this podcast. Sign up for the message boards at boards.irishbreakdown.com, and keep continuing to enjoy all the content that we're putting out. So let's move on to the mailbag, Ryan. We've got some good questions. If we'll go through and get some more. There's a lot of receiver questions, and if you have some more, we'll get to those as well. But let's dive into these questions. A lot of them are receiver related. Archer452, our resident Buckeye, says, how do you feel about Stuckey as a coach? He has very little coaching experience, but he did play in the NFL. Ryan, we've talked a lot about this, but let's dive into that. Let's kind of share it, because you've had a chance. You broke down a lot of Baylor film, kind of what you saw from 20 to 21, and then of course what we were able to see in the spring and what our expectations are for Coach Stuckey.
Yeah, I would say Archer, for me, he's passed every test that he needs to pass so far, right? Because you talk about what he did in Baylor in 2021, 2020 Baylor, and I know it was abbreviated season, so it's not the perfect sample size, right? But wide receiver group was just not great in 2020. Coach Stuckey comes in, it's leaps and bounds better in 2021. I mean, literally, I'm pretty sure the season before, Tyquan Thornton had like 17 catches for like 160-something yards, and then he turns him into a second-round draft pick, right? So Coach Stuckey did amazing things in his 1 year at Baylor. He comes here, and I've only seen one practice live, but I'll say attention to detail is the biggest thing, right? And I think you're seeing that in practice, working on releases, physicality through the catch point, the nuances of the wide receiver position are things that they're really focusing on. So it's a wait and see as far as what the long-term looks like, but from what I can evaluate Coach Stuckey on, he's done a great job so far, in my opinion.
And I think it's that relying on that experience as a player.
Yeah.
Maybe you don't have it as a coach, but you have it as a player. And we saw, you're an Ohio State fan, right? How much experience did Brian Hartline have coaching before he took over at Ohio State, right? But what did Brian Hartline rely on? It was his career in the NFL and what he had learned from that part of his career. Brandon Plensner asks, after the recent offers to twins Jared and Jeremy Smith, I'm curious if in your experience, have you ever seen or heard of twin football players committing and or playing at separate schools? Well, there's one that should be very familiar to Notre Dame fans, and that's the Ekwanus. Notre Dame signed to Osita, but they didn't offer the brother who ended up becoming a top 10 NFL draft pick. That's the first one that jumps off my head, Ryan, because they were. I don't think a lot of people realized that they were twins because they look nothing alike. One is a 6'1" chiseled linebacker. The other one's a 300-plus pound offensive lineman, but I'm pretty sure they were twins, correct? So, they're definitely in the same class. I believe that they were twins.
Is Osita going into his fourth year on campus? Then definitely. Then yeah.
I know they were in the same class, but it could be one of those things where one was born right after the other, and one of them has one of those weird birthdays that they couldn't start.
Right.
Who knows? But I'm pretty sure that they're twins. I could be wrong on that, but I'm pretty sure that they're twins.
Yep.
Other than that, do you know of twins that have played at different schools? I know that Ricardo and Devin McDonald were brothers, but they weren't twins. And obviously Devin played at Notre Dame and Ricardo played at Pitt, correct?
I believe so. I'm just trying to work. I mean, obviously the Adamalolas, I think of like the McCourty brothers, but obviously they played together.
I was right. I was wrong. I'm sorry. Ricardo and Devin McDonald were born on the same date, November 8th, 1969.
Oh, so there's another one.
They were twins. Nice. So I knew they were brothers. I just didn't realize that they were twins. So
see, someone just said the Barbers, but they both played at Virginia, so that's not a
example. He said at separate schools. Yeah, Rondé and Tiki both played at Virginia.
Yep.
So
I can't think of another one.
Yeah. So the two that we thought of were Notre Dame related. So obviously, and Notre Dame got the McDonald one worked out pretty well for both. Ricardo was a 4th-round draft pick and number 88 overall. Devin was also a 4th-round draft pick, went 19 spots lower a year later. They're both really good football players. And, of course, Devin McDonald played on some really good football teams at Notre Dame. He was drafted in 1993, so he was on the 92, 91, 90, and 89 teams. He was part of some of those great recruiting classes that Lou Holtz put together early in his career. So, Brandon, that's a good question. I can't think of any off the top of my head. of any twin brothers that played at different schools, but I'm sure there have been, other than the two that we thought of.
Yeah.
Coach Bent asks, part one, B. Ryan, I know it's early still, but how do you rate Marcus Freeman's balance between best players and best scheme fits compared to the previous staff? It says, why seem to be highly rated players and Ty and BK were best fits?
I mean, there is definitely a balance that needs to happen, but I would say more. I think I've seen with Coach Freeman and the staff that there's a trust in their coaches as evaluators and as developers, because at the end of the day, if you take a really good football player, you should be able to figure out how to use them, right? Like there's ways to best accentuate the talents that they have. So I think coach, they've done a good job as far as evaluating the need versus the talent level there. But I also think it's more, let's trust the coaches around them to get the best out of these players. I don't think it's something where you have to recruit to just this scheme and just this coverage that we like to run.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's definitely a aura around it that let's get good football players here and then let's figure out how to use them. I think, again, that's why we talk about recruiting Jeremiah Love at multiple positions, potentially talking to Micah Tease as an athlete. Ronan Hanafin, if he doesn't work out a wide receiver, could be a guy on defense, right? Like those guys, you don't take those types of players that many gambles per se.
Mm-hmm.
If you don't trust your team, you don't trust your developers to put them in the right spots consistently.
It's kind of like the NFL draft, Ryan. Nobody just goes out and gets the best players without any thought of whether or not they fit what they're doing offensively or defensively. And Coach Freeman, I actually interviewed Coach Freeman today for some features that we'll have coming up. So we were able to sit down in the office today and chat about a lot of different things. And that kind of thing came up. And it was we were talking about the defense with Al Golden and just kind of what he was looking for, because a lot of the people focus on scheme, and his focus wasn't so much on scheme, but more so philosophy, because the scheme has to be dictated by what you have. And he talked about, when Coach Golden came and interviewed, it wasn't about this is the 5 coverages I'm going to use, this is how we're going to line up. It was more about this is the philosophy I believe in, block destruction and playing fast and making plays and all that. And so you always need to be able to adapt, but you're also not going to go out and recruit a player who's a great player that has bad fit for what you do, because then if you adjust to fit him, well, but what if the rest of it doesn't fit all the rest of the players you have? There always has to be some semblance of this is what we believe in, right? And this is what we do. And then you recruit the best players you possibly can to that. Now you have to then be open enough to say, hey, we're a team. Alabama is a perfect example. You're likely going to see the Will Anderson role look a whole lot different in 2023 than it does in 2022 and 2021. Why? Because they've tailored it to him, which is why they've looked a lot more like a 4-down team in recent years than they have a 3-down team, even though they're still in that same sort of alignment, because he fits the system, but it's tailoring it to what they do more. And that's what you have to do, but they haven't changed their overall philosophy and structure. So you have to find that balance, but it's about, this is what we believe in: speed, making plays and all that. Who are the best players we can find that fit that? And that's what they're doing. That's why you're not seeing them there's some really good 240-pound linebackers in the country, but that's not what they've really looked for. Junior Tuihalamaka being an exception because there were reasons for that, but it's just not primarily what they're looking for. And then we saw this spring why. Oh, that makes sense. Now we see why they because he's so smart and quick. But you always have to balance that. And it's like NFL. Oh, we're just take the best player available. Okay, so if you just drafted Trevor Lawrence last year, and the best player in this class is also a quarterback, are you going to take a quarterback again?
Yes.
No, you're not. Right? So there's always got to be some level of fit into this conversation.
Mm-hmm.
USMA 87. How much do you feel success in the field will impact 23 commits? Could it open the door to grabbing someone committed to another school?
How much you feel success on the field will impact? Huge. I think that one reason that you're seeing guys like Jaden Greathouse potentially moving the commitment date back into the season because he wants to see the on-field product. He literally said that he wants to see what the offense looks like under Coach Reese now without Brian Kelly kind of standing over top of him, right? And I think that I've heard that from a couple different players that they want to see the on-field success. So I think that it's tremendous. And I think that if Notre Dame is able to get off to a really good start in the beginning of the season, I mean, they already have tremendous momentum on the recruiting trail, but that could like solidify momentum. If they have on-field success on top of the caliber of recruiters that they have on this staff, then Notre Dame is, I mean, it's going to continue to snowball the success they're having on the trail.
Mm-hmm. I think this is why I'm not too worried about some of the holes, like quarterback, for example. I'm not too worried if kids commit elsewhere, because I really believe that if Notre Dame is on offense, what we think they can be on offense, I think it's going to make it a lot easier for them to flip a kid if they need to, if that need arises. And so I do think it could open up flipping somebody if the offense can really go do that. And especially if it results in a win over Ohio State or a close game against Ohio State and a win over Clemson and USC, I definitely think it could have that impact. There's no question about it.
Agree.
Sean Kane, assuming Notre Dame gets Cam Williams, what group has a higher ceiling? Williams, Larson, and CJ Carr, or Buckner, Eli Raridan, and Tobias? I think that's a little bit unfair.
Yes.
Because you're taking 3 dudes from 3 different classes
compared to one class.
I mean, obviously the answer for me there is it's Buckner, Raridan, and Tobias. I think Tobias is better than Cam Williams was at the same age, but we've only seen Cam as a sophomore, right?
Sure.
Eli Raridan is better than Jack Larson. I don't know if I would have said that when Eli Raridan was a sophomore, though, right? Nobody had heard of him when he was a sophomore, really. He didn't really started to break out a little as a junior, and then senior just really was a monster. You know, Buckner and CJ Carr are similar at the same age as a sophomore. I mean, as much as I love Tyler Buckner, he hadn't played a lot of football. Right. Tyler Buckner as a junior was a whole lot better than what CJ Carr was as a sophomore, but we haven't seen CJ as a junior yet. You know, so it's really unfair to do that. But I mean, to your question, that the Buckner, Raridan, Tobias, Merriweather trio is better. But it took Notre Dame 3 classes to put that trio together. You know what I mean? The group that you're asking about is a 20 is one group. I would also say that I don't think Cam Williams and Jack Larson are super, super high ceiling guys. I think they're more high floor guys, especially Cam Williams. Like, I don't know if I see Cam Williams, again, just based off sophomore film. I don't see him as becoming a Michael Floyd. Mm-hmm. I just don't see that kind of ceiling or a Will Fuller. But I think at the very least, he's going to be Chris Brown. He could be a TJ Jones, not style of play, production-wise, where, you know, good rotation player for 3 years and then breaks out as a senior. To me, that's more of where I see him, which is fine.
Yeah.
But again, that's as a sophomore. We haven't seen junior film yet. And that's what makes it tough to compare. Because a lot of the older kids, especially, I didn't start watching sophomore film until recently because I didn't need to. Nobody got offered as a sophomore. So we'll see. Zach Martin, over under 2.5, 2024 commits by the end of July. So, Zach, are you saying like 2.5 on top of what they already have? Because if that's the case,
I think he's saying 2.5 is how many commitments from now until the end of July for the 2024 cycle.
Yeah, so 2.5 between now and the end of July.
That's how I'm reading it. Yeah.
Okay, I'm going under. Because that would have to be 3 kids committing in the 24 class. The 24 class. Yeah. Between now over the next month, and I just don't see 3 kids doing that.
I would probably say under. I think a tougher one would be 1.5, right?
Yeah, because I could see them surprising and popping a kid. Yeah.
Yeah, right.
But
right.
3, I couldn't even tell you who the other 2 would be if they get Cam Williams. So it's an interesting one. Now, if we get into 2023 commits, then I would take
then for
over.
Sure. Way over.
Yeah. Riker Ferg, who just signed up for the message board this weekend. So welcome officially. I mean, you're now like a double super like secret member of the Irish Breakdown board because you are now on a family because you're now on the board. Riker Ferg asks, if we get 4 receivers for the 2023 class, what's a good number to get for 2024 class? 99 problems, but BK ain't one. Had a similar comment right here, Ryan, and he said, how many do you take? I think you take 4 again. We're talking about 23 and 24, 1 and 22, 4 and 23, 4 and 24. 9 total is solid. I take 9 to 12 receivers and total injuries, transfers happen, and use rotation in season. I think that's kind of what we were getting to early in the show. Back to Riker's question is the number is going to depend on what you do in 24 and 23. I think 8 over a 2-year span is about as much as you can get to where you're not almost ensuring yourself that you're going to lose somebody. I mean, that's kind of how I look at it, right, Ryan? I mean, if you start getting like 5 and 5, you're going to lose some guys. So what's the point? You're guaranteeing you're going to lose somebody, or you're going to have to move somebody to another position, which I don't think is what they're trying to do. So I think 8 over 2 years is probably the ideal number.
Sure.
So if they get 4, yeah, sure, 4 more next year. But if they're able to, I mean, if they just hit every single one, they get Jaden Greathouse, they get Ronan Hanafin, they get Rico Flores, and they get Micah Tease. But you got to make some tough decisions with what you're going to do next, because it's going to be almost impossible, in my opinion, to play 10 guys or even 9 guys from a 2-year span. 8's going to be tough. Yeah. But to play but with 8, I feel like there's enough difference in development where some guys are going to play early and be gone in 3 years, and some guys are, maybe going to be there longer. So I think 8 in a 2-year span, Ryan, is really the way to be. So 5 and 3, 4 and 4, 3 and 5, hopefully that's not the case. That would be bad. But that's my number.
It gets so interesting too, because I agree with you. I think 8 in 2 years is a good number to work with. It's just 2022 only brought you 1, right? So it's just because then you have to project forward a little bit that Tobias is the only guy in his class right now. And then, but also it's the age of transfer portals. So if you ever get title numbers or whatever, or you need numbers, then you could always attempt to go that route, I guess, too. But yeah, I think ultimately 4 and 4 would be a great number. I think 5 and 3. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I agree. I think 8's a really good number for 2 years.
Mm-hmm. And you don't want to be in a situation where you're doing that very often. You really don't.
Agree.
Unless you're just just completely loading up. Brandon Plesner says, does the fact Texas has Arch Manning and Notre Dame, by the way, for those who don't know, Arch Manning committed to Texas this weekend. Does the fact Texas has Arch Manning and Notre Dame has no 2023 quarterback is going to affect the Greathouse recruitment? Ryan, I think we need to kind of get away from this notion of a quarterback can only impact you if he's in your class.
Right.
I think a big time quarterback can impact you in multiple ways. If let's just say hypothetically, I was told by somebody last year that if Jack Cohn doesn't come off the bench against Virginia Tech and rally them to a victory, and let's say Notre Dame loses that game, they were pretty much ready to turn the reins over to Tyler Buck, because the season's over with. You're not in playoff hunt anymore. It's time to prepare for the future. Let's say that happens. And let's say Tyler Buckner starts the rest of the season and Notre Dame runs the table like they did and Buckner really blows up. Mm-hmm. That would have had such a greater impact on recruiting right now than it's having, where there's question marks about the offense and who the quarterback's going to be. Now, I'm not saying they should have made that move. I think they made the right move. Jack Cohn deserved to be your starter because you're still trying to play for a championship. You, at that point in time, when you beat Virginia Tech, you still have a chance to make the playoff, and they almost did. They finished 5th. They're a Alabama, Georgia, outcome being different in the SEC title game away from being a playoff team. You can argue whether they should or should not have been there. It's not the point. They'd have been in there.
Right.
And so to me, it wasn't time to turn that reign over. But the point is, had it happened, it would have impacted recruiting because you'd have had a young, proven quarterback. Same thing with Ohio State. Who's the quarterback in Ohio State that's in 2023 that's convincing all these kids to jump on board? Have you heard any receivers talking about, I can't wait to play for Devin Brown with Devin Brown? I mean, I know On3 ranked him really high and he was highly ranked, but he wasn't that dynamic personality like an Arch Manning or whatever, or dynamic name. And so I think CJ Carr has had that impact. And CJ came on campus the weekend Jaden Greathouse was on campus to make sure that he met those kids.
Yep.
So I don't think it's going to impact it, to be honest with you. I really don't. If it was close, yes, it matters.
It's a tiebreaker. Yeah.
Yeah. There's no question. But it's not going to be a situation where a kid that loves Notre Dame is going to now flip somewhere else because of the quarterback situation. For example, we were asked about, some people asked about Richard Young. We've said all along, look, Notre Dame did a nice job, but we still don't think it's going to happen. There a lot of other things would have to happen. I'll tell you right now, that's a kid that I think that not having Dante Moore in this class is going to hurt you. I think that was the only chance you had because he doesn't know who CJ Carr is, right? But a receiver will know, and Jaden Greathouse has now met him. So I don't think it's going to have a big impact. The only way it will have an impact is if it was already a really close situation. This was the question from JC Clapp. Do we have a decent shot or a long shot at Richard Young? It's always been a long shot, but there's some things that could happen that could maybe make it, a factor. We'll get into that more when other things happen. So we'll get into that right now. Ian Johnson says, this is a good one for you, Ryan. Why does it seem like there are more great receivers than corners in general? Do corners tend to start later, so develop later?
The simple answer is that everybody wants the ball in their hands, right? Like they want to be the guy. I remember I was talking to J.C. Horn when he was coming out of South Carolina, and his dad, of course, is Joe Horn, that was a fantastic receiver for the New Orleans Saints. And the only reason that J.C. started playing corner in college or when he was transitioning, because he was actually a really good wide receiver in high school, is Joe Horn, his father, told him, there's a lot of good receivers that are coming out each and every year. There's not a lot of good corners, though. That's why you're going to play that spot, because eventually you're going to make a lot of money because you're going to be one of the few guys, right? So I think it's just simply guys want the football. That's why everybody growing up was a running back or a quarterback or a wide receiver, right? Because they wanted the football. I played fullback in junior high, right? Because I wanted the football. And then I got to high school and they're like, you're a linebacker, defensive end, and offensive tackle. That's what you are. So it just is what it is, man. That's like the glorifying of being the guy with the ball in your hands. And I understand it. I get it. I get it.
I also think that the nature of what offenses have become the last decade of 3 and 4 receiver offenses has necessitated that more high school teams put their best athletes at receiver more. So maybe kids that would have maybe played corner are now playing receiver, and they're like, hey, I like this whole getting the ball thing, than back in the past. I think the other thing too, Ryan, is I think cornerback requires more skill than receiver. And I think that's it too. I think you can be a really athletic kid. As long as you can catch the ball okay, you can be a pretty good receiver, especially in college. NFL is a different deal. You got to have the IQ in the NFL more so. In college, you can get away with being really athletic more. It's not it, but you can get away with it more than you can in the NFL. I think in college, even to be a really good corner in college, I mean, yes, athleticism is a big part of it, but I think there's more of a need for skill. Not being a guy that's great at stance and starts as a receiver is not going to hurt you nearly as bad as a guy who doesn't have good transition footwork at cornerback. It's going to hurt. Same athlete, same size, all of it. Technique is going to hurt a corner a lot more. It's going to hurt a receiver. Not being a great technician. So I think there's a lot more skill involved. And you and I were talking a little bit about Troy Pride earlier too. There's certain things that you really need to be a great corner, in my opinion, that sometimes can be harder to find. Gavin KGD, is Micah Tease a guy you guys feel better about going further into the season with battling USC versus talents? Like he commits after the season ends and Notre Dame smacks down Lincoln Riley and company. Do you think it's going to take that long, Ryan? I don't know if he's going to. I think he's going to commit this summer, don't you?
Yeah.
I don't know that for a fact, but
I would be surprised based on everything I've heard that if he takes it into the season, to be honest. I think we'll have a decision way before the season, honestly. Yeah.
Right. A follow-up question here from 99 Pros BK81. He said, Brian, what things could make it happen to make Notre Dame a bigger player in the Richard Young recruitment? You keep alluding to something could still happen. I didn't allude to it. We've explained it in the past. I mean, you look at the schools he's looking at. I think that Notre Dame overcame past Oregon and Oklahoma with their visit. I don't know if that's still the case after the Oregon visit. We'll see. But it was always going to be tough to beat Bama and Georgia. And so what we were referring to is if Bama gets, I'm drawing a blank, Cedric Baxter, right?
Yep.
And if Georgia gets Justice Haynes and Oregon gets a kid and Oklahoma gets it, then all of a sudden you're sitting there where Richard Young's looking at the running back rooms, and not that he's afraid of competition because he's not, but he's like, this one's a little bit better situation for me, especially with all the injuries Notre Dame's going through. That could be something they could really sell to him. And so I just think it would require some dominoes to fall. I don't think they're just going to beat Georgia and Alabama just because. Right. I think it would have to be a situation where they had some things to help them. So we've explained that a couple times in recent shows after his visits and before his visit. So it's not that I'm alluding to it. I just didn't want to have to repeat that same thing again. So, but that's what we're referring to, since obviously some people weren't quite sure what they're going for. Hudat says with super chat, is Dante still in play? We're not really diving into the Dante Moore conversations. As I've said in the past, Notre Dame is still recruiting Dante Moore, and that's about right now all I'm going to say about it. When the time is right, I'll have a very long intel feature about that whole recruitment, and that'll be on the message board. But we're just not, for a million reasons, we're just not going to dive into that right now. But I really do appreciate the super chat, and I feel bad because you did give a super chat, but that's just kind of what I've said before. We're not going to dive into the Dante thing, other than, is he still in play for Notre Dame? Yeah, I think he's still in play for Notre Dame, but it's obviously has been trending in the right direction for a while. Couple interesting questions. Alex Udell, ketchup is for fries and meatloaf only. Change my mind. Alex, for me, I don't like meatloaf and I don't like ketchup on fries. So I'm not the guy to try to change your mind.
I mean, you dip the fries in the ketchup. It's delicious. Right. You also put ketchup on burgers and hot dogs. And meatloaf, you make the spicy ketchup stuff that goes on top. Sure. I'm cool with that. Sure. Yeah. I
know people that put ketchup on eggs. I don't eat ketchup at all. I mean, I don't like ketchup, but not at all. I hate ketchup.
It's the best.
My whole life, I've never liked ketchup. If you're, I feel like fries. I have the same opinion on fries as I have on steaks. Mm-hmm. If I need steak sauce to eat your steak, then you didn't give me a good steak. And 100%. I kind of feel like that about fries. If your fries aren't good enough to eat by themselves, then they're not fries I want.
It's a bad take. It's a bad take.
No, if it's not good enough, then why do I need the condiment? It's like, then you didn't do your fries correctly. So I just don't like ketchup. So that's my stance.
I dig it.
The only thing I'll dip fries in is, this is more when I was a kid. There's this place in Lima where I grew up called Kewpie, and they had like chocolate malts, and I love dipping the fries in the chocolate malt. People do that at Wendy's too.
Yeah.
Chocolate malts they have. But yeah, I did that as a kid. I don't do that anymore. If you see like a grown 40-something-year-old man like dipping fries in a chocolate malt.
So are you not a condiment person at all, or is it just a ketchup thing that you don't like?
I'm not a huge condiment person, period. But I mean, like I don't like. It's just more like I don't like them. Mm. Like I understand why people like mayonnaise, but I don't like mayonnaise. But I put it. My wife will put it in tuna fish when she makes tuna fish, but the tuna fish I feel like is strong enough to kind of drown out the flavor of the mayonnaise a little bit. I don't like mustard. I just don't like the taste of mustard. My dad puts mustard on hot dogs and stuff like that. I don't like mustard. I don't like sour cream. I don't like a lot of the condiments, and I don't know why. I'm a very picky eater. But like hamburgers, if I get a hamburger, I get lettuce and cheese, and that's about it. And it's like,
interesting.
That's all I put on a hamburger. Yeah, and it's like the same thing. If your hamburger's not good enough that I need to put all these things on it, then it's probably not good enough. But some people like the taste of onions and like the taste of ketchup, and that's a different story. If it's just because you like those extra flavors, that's a different animal.
How about a taco though? You don't put any like salsa or sauce,
cheese and lettuce. I mean, like hot sauce, a little bit of hot sauce. Like I don't. Like I'll put hot sauce on certain things. So like Taco Bell has like the mild sauce. I'll put that on the taco. But that's about it.
We have this one Mexican place. I do like the old fashioned, right? You get the cilantro with the diced onion, and then you just put a little bit of their spicy salsa on there. Oh yeah, yes sir.
We were in Mexico on a cruise one time, Ange and I, and I'm a real picky eater, right? So I like what I like.
Yep.
And so we're in Mexico, and I'm like, okay, I don't know what spicy food just doesn't. I love spicy food, but spicy food doesn't love me. You know what I mean? So I was like, well, I'm going to be safe here because I don't want to go back on the cruise ship and be occupied for the next 6 hours, if you catch my drift. And so I was like, I'll get a taco. I didn't realize tacos in Mexico are a whole lot different than tacos that you get at a Mexican restaurant in America. And my wife tried to warn me because she's from San Diego, so she understands that a real Mexican taco is not like what you're getting at Taco Bell and local places, and I did not like it at all. Like, I'm like, where's the cheese? Like, where's the lettuce? It's like, nope.
I had the same instance in Mexico with some of the food, and then also I remember my opinion of what tequila was is much different than what it actually is in Mexico. I was like, oh, this is actually good. I actually like the taste of this. Wow.
Yeah, interesting. Very interesting. Never had tequila before, but it's very interesting.
I stay away from tequila, but yeah.
Nate Golino with a super chat. Thank you, Nate. Can you give a comp for Tobias Merriweather to an elite receiver? Well, I've given mine before, and it's T. Higgins. I see similar body. I see similar games. I see similar ball skills. I see similar impact. And obviously T. Higgins was, Ryan and I could debate, is he, where he is in the NFL. And actually, I don't disagree with your take. Now that you've differentiated between what you thought of him as a college player and what you as an NFL prospect, I agree with you as an NFL prospect. I think his speed was a bigger issue for him in the NFL as being a number one than college. Mm-hmm. But in college, he was a big time player.
Sure.
And to me, that's my comp. I mean, there's a lot of I don't love comps. We give them a lot more now than we used to because people like them, and I think it helps people understand what type of player he is. But I don't think that I could find a better comparison for size, athleticism, style of play, all of it, than T. Higgins. I have a hard time finding a better comp for Tobias Merriweather than T. Higgins. What are your thoughts, Ryan?
Yeah, I'm going to defer to the T. Higgins comp. I don't have a better one. So, I mean, we'll be completely transparent. All I'll tell you is he's 6'4" with vines for arms, pretty athletic, and he's a really, really nuanced player for his age. So that sounds like T. Higgins to you. I guess it sounds like T. Higgins.
And he can play faster than what his 40 time might otherwise show. Because, T ran a 4.57, 4.58 at Clemson's pro day, right?
Yeah, 4.57, yeah. Uh-huh.
But I mean, he had no problem at all stretching the field in college. I mean, no problem at all. And I mean, if you just look at his numbers, his last 2 years at Clemson, T. Higgins had 25 touchdowns. He averaged 20.3 yards per catch as a freshman. 15.9 was his down year in 2018. And then in 2019, he averaged 19.8 yards per catch. For his career, he averaged 18.1 yards per catch.
Is that good?
It's pretty good. It's pretty good. I mean, so again, there's this thought that, well, you got to be a burner to be a big play guy. And I'm like, well, no, not really. There's other ways to be a big play guy. I just said T. Higgins, who ran a 4.57, averaged 18.1 yards per catch in his career. Do you know what Will Fuller's career yards per catch was? 17.4. Yep. Mm-hmm. Which is lower than T. Higgins.
But still very good.
Extremely good. Extremely good. And Will Fuller had 2 years where, Will Fuller was over 20 as a junior, right? Like in 2015. Yeah. He was at 20.3 as a junior. Well, T. Higgins was at 19.8. So, again, very similar players. Will's one down year of 14.4 is what you see. But, I mean, in T's overall production was dragged down a little bit by the fact that they had Justin Ross and Hunter Renfrow for much of his career, which helped as well. And then you had Travis Etienne coming out of the backfield and all those other type of things. So the ball got spread out a little bit more, but that's my comp for him. Anyone else that you could even think of? I mean, like Justin Jefferson's the only other one but I think Justin Jefferson's a little bit more explosive, a little different type of player to me, but similar body type, I think, than Tobias. But that's the only other one that really pops in my head as a potential comparison.
Yeah, I think it's a unique comparison because it's kind of like a rare player, right? Like you don't talk about the 6'4" guys that are, not height, weight, speed guys, but like understand how to get on top of guys and use their size to their advantage and actually have some flexibility to them. Like it's not a normal type of player, right? So yeah, I think we'll just stick with T and kind of keep it there because I just genuinely don't have another one that makes any sense to me. I mean, yeah, because every other tall receiver, I feel like that I'm thinking about guys that win down the field at like 6'4". They're like the Tyrell Williams of the world, but like those dudes are burners, like they're not like slow guys. They're like,
or they're like 215, 220 types,
not lanky. Yeah,
right. Like a Mike Williams kind of guy who's a thicker guy, that kind of guy. So they're just different types of players, in my opinion.
Yep.
Last couple here. Matt McCarthy. What does the 2024 linebacker board look like? Adarius Hayes, Aaron Childs, and Jayshon Ross. Real quick, I'll say this. Jayshon Ross is being recruited as an edge player for Notre Dame right now. So it's like he's that Viper position. So I would not put him right now on the linebacker board. But Darius Hayes, Ryan, for sure is on that list. There's no doubt about that.
Yeah, Darius Hayes, 6'4", 210 pounds. He's kind of the real athletic guy that I think could be a Mike. I think he could be a Will. He's got enough speed to work in pursuit. There's no doubt he's a little raw from a processing perspective, but the kid can run at 6'4". So he's right up the top. And hits. Oh, yes. Yeah, a lot of hit power there. Sammy Brown is another guy out of Georgia. He's a track guy at 215, 220 pounds. Ran 10.7 this past year in the 100, sub 22 in the 200-meter dash, and also ran. Sorry, I almost said broad jumped. He long jumped over 22 feet as well at that size. So he's a really athletic, explosive player. They're recruiting him at either Mike or Will. They think he could play both potentially at the next level. And then I guess if I throw another guy, I know they've been on Anthony Specca out of Pennsylvania for a little while. He's a little more of your traditional throwback type of player, right? He's about 6'3", 6'2", 220, 225 pounds. Plays at Central Catholic, if I remember correctly, out there in Pittsburgh. He's a really physical downhill football player. Notre Dame has obviously had some success in that school in the past. So Speck is more of your traditional Mike, but he's a guy that Notre Dame has liked for a while.
I think Chris Jones is a guy to keep an eye on as well, who's a kid from Virginia that was on campus this summer. He's a kid to definitely keep an eye on. We're trying to get in touch with him to see how things are going with him. And then obviously Rover is included in this, should be included in this conversation, and a guy that Ryan and I both absolutely love. Ryan talked about him today in the mailbag is Garrett Stover. Love that kid as a Rover, whose cousin Cade plays at Ohio State. He visited Notre Dame. He's a kid. Obviously Ohio State's going to be really tough to beat, but Notre Dame's going to be a player in that one. But he's another guy to keep an eye on. And I would also, the board's evolving too. Go ahead, Ryan.
Yeah. No, I was just going to throw out Miles Graham, who's another guy that I know Notre Dame likes, right? Like he's Ernest Graham's son. I think he could play Rover. I think he could play Will. He can kind of play all over the place. I don't even know exactly where Notre Dame is recruiting him 100%. I just know he's going to play on the second level, and he's a really dynamic athlete. Obviously, Ernest went to Florida. Miles has been to Florida a couple times. Probably going to be a tough pull out of the South, but he does have interest in Notre Dame. He's already been to campus. So
Kingston Vayama Asa is a kid from, I believe he plays at
St. John
Bosco. He visited for the spring game with Peyton Woodyard, and he's on the board. Yep. So there's a lot of guys on the board. It's early yet. It's as far as knowing like who really they're going to get. Like Anthony Speck was on the board really early, but haven't heard as much about him lately. Yep. He made a lot of trips this summer, didn't get to Notre Dame. That kind of tells me that maybe that communication isn't as heavy as it was early. So we'll see how that one plays out. And again, we've had a bit of a coaching change since then, even though the D coordinator is the same. So we see how it plays out. And Alan Watson with a super chat. Who is the person or persons that once they commit that the rest will finally pull the trigger and commit? Well, there's one guy, but we're not going to go there.
What's his name, Brian?
I don't know. I don't know if there is that guy still out there, to be honest with you.
Yeah, I don't know if there is either.
Yeah, I think those guys have kind of already happened. Keon Keeley was that kind of guy. I think CJ Cars is had an impact on that with the 2024 class.
For sure.
I don't know if there is that guy, to be honest with you.
Not with the timeline the way it is. I would say maybe like if you had a guy on defense that was teetering and then Caleb Downs got in the class sometime soon, right? Like they pulled a little upset there, then that would be, that would move the needle for sure. But yeah, I don't really know if there's another guy in the class because, Notre Dame's sitting at 15 commits already. So it's a pretty big class at this point, So.
Yeah, I don't know if there's a guy that commits to says, oh, the rest will come. I think it's positionally there's some of that, right? Receiver. But everywhere else, it's like a guy at defensive line. It's Jason Moore or nobody. It's, linebacker. It's Jaden Ausberry and Sam Mpemba. And I don't even know, Sam Mpemba is more of an athlete. In secondary, it's Josiah Wagner. Micah Bell and Christian Gray corner, Caleb Downs at safety. Micah Bell and Christian Gray already have commitment dates scheduled. So I don't think there's like anything that happened that's going to change that. And I don't think them committing, if they did pick Notre Dame hypothetically, would then all of a sudden change things for Josiah Wagner. He's going to commit on his own timeline. So I just think the fact that they're at 15 like you said, Ryan, it's like I don't think that domino effect is already going to happen. As far as a commit that could have happened, I think that there's a quarterback that could have an impact like that. But I just right now that's just not where it's where it is at this point in time. So, yeah, that's where they're at. That's where they're at this point in time. So, and that is going to do it for today's questions, everybody. Thanks so much for joining us for today's recruiting hour. Obviously, a lot to discuss here as we dove into receivers, and now we've had our mailbag. But appreciate everybody. We'll be back tomorrow, 1 o'clock again. We'll have some team stuff, but we'll have a show tonight. Not us. We won't have a show tonight. But IB Nation Sports Talk is going to go live tonight. They're going to talk about the running back situation. It's going to be Sean Stires and Vince Dadari are going to talk tonight about Notre Dame's running back depth chart, kind of where things stand. Sean is going to talk about the Notre Dame head baseball coach situation and kind of some names to keep an eye on perhaps, and just a little bit about Link Jarrett and all those type of things. And, Link Jarrett had a bit of a master class on how to properly leave a place with dignity and class. That maybe the previous head football coach of this institution might have been able to learn a little bit of something from. But that's because one guy has class and respect and the other guy doesn't. Mace AK hits it properly, everyone. Join the message board, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel and the notification bell, share this podcast, and leave a 5-star review. Visit the IB store for the best merch. And as always, go Irish. Thanks, everybody, for joining us. We will talk to you again here very, very soon. 6 o'clock tonight, 6 p.m. Eastern, IB Nation Sports Talk. Make sure you check it out, and then we'll be back tomorrow at 1 o'clock to talk a little bit about a team stuff. So it's going to be a very, very, very busy next week. Ryan and I were going over all the days with 2 shows and all that type of stuff. So it's going to be a busy couple weeks, but we're ready for it. Nice and rested and ready to rock and roll. Have a great day. We'll talk to you again soon on the Irish Breakdown Podcast.